You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited, scarred globe. Welcome to this instance of Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Said that in a bit tortured way. Shane is not feeling well today, but she's not necessarily going to be here. He should be here tomorrow or the day after when he gets together. However, that is not necessarily going to deter us or going to stop us one bit for having our instance of Fault Lines. But let's get started. Let's go to the headlines. In the news, about 149,788 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday. I'm sorry, it took me a moment to read that because as I read, I was like, wait a minute, that's a big jump. About 149,788 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, and there were about 688 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 92,005 cases per day, an increase of 139% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 50% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 58% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 35,325,243 people across the United States and has killed 614,104 unfortunate human beings. We haven't seen this high single-day caseload since first day of February, near the peak of the winter sickness season. Just punctuating that. The number is high. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has stated that the state will not go into another lockdown. This comes after Florida broke their own COVID case record on Friday, hitting 21,683 new infections for the day. And in July, the state accounted for 40% of the country's total infections. Let that sink in. The person who's supposed to be a model for the Republican Party, 40% of the total state infections. Biden was speaking yesterday. He made a comment about Florida and Texas, and this is particularly why. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has been found to have sexually harassed women by the investigators appointed by the New York Attorney General's Letitia James, reportedly violating state and federal law. This follows a publicized interview between two investigators and Cuomo just the day before, in which Cuomo suggested one of the pair had an axe to grind. I believe that was an 11-hour interview. President Biden has called on Cuomo to resign. And it's not just Biden, Pelosi, Biden, basically all corners of the Democratic Party, including whether or not Cuomo potentially broke a law that he apparently updated. I'll come back to that one. In New York, Mayor de Blasio has announced the start of a city program called Key to New York City Pass. As a pressure to get people vaccinated, the program will require proof of vaccination for both workers and customers at indoor businesses, including restaurants, gyms, and entertainment venues, and performances such as movies, concerts, and Broadway. Shane called me about this yesterday. Apparently, it's only one vaccination, though. You don't necessarily need both. But I suppose this is a start. The CDC has identified a legal authority for a new and different moratorium that would be for areas with high and substantial increases in COVID-19 infections. The Biden administration is set to announce the new 60-day program today that will protect areas where 90% of Americans live. And shout out to Cori Bush on this. Whatever people want to say, you have many people who are basically bitter of politics and everything else. Cori Bush was basically laying out on the street for the past several days, trying to get the Biden administration to pay attention because Congress and the Biden administration basically dropped the ball and left tens of millions of people in the lurch for potentially being kicked out of their homes. So, good on her. Former President Barack Obama has reportedly scaled back his 60th birthday party due to rising Delta variant case counts after receiving pushback for the scale and intensity of the party compared to rumblings of a return to lockdowns, mandated masks, and even vaccines, and a worsening of the COVID situation overall. The party would have been held on Martha's Vineyard and attendance approximately 700, including staff, which have been reduced to only include family and close friends. Shout out to the word intensity of the party. I love that. Intensity of the party. Obama was just going to be smash dancing or whatever. Yesterday, Human Rights Watch released a report criticizing some Lebanese government officials, saying that they were, quote, tactically accepted the risks, unquote, of storing ammonium nitrate in a portside warehouse that set fire, then exploded late last year, catastrophically damaging the city port and much of the surrounding infrastructure and killing hundreds. Lebanon's caretaker government called the report, quote, faulty, unquote, and said that it, quote, deviates from the truth, unquote. Firefighters in Greece raced to contain a fire that forced the evacuation of thousands near Athens. Temperatures in parts of the country are as high as 45 degrees Celsius or 113 degrees Fahrenheit for Americans. The fire is burning on the outskirts of Athens through nearby fires and has destroyed dozens of homes. Let's get to the Olympics. So far, the medal leaders in order are the United States, China, Russian athletes, Great Britain, and Japan. China has the most gold medals with 32. The U.S. follows with 25, followed by Japan with 20. Kristina Simonskaya, the Belarusian sprinter who refused to fly home, left Japan this morning and boarded a flight to Vienna after spending a night in a secure hotel under Japanese police protection. She will be transported to Poland after she lands, where she has been granted a visa. U.S. women's basketball team won their 53rd medal in a row after blowing out Australia 79-55 behind Brianna Stewart's 23 points. Next up, they'll face Serbia in the semifinals on Friday. And last, U.S. hurdler Sydney McLaughlin set a world record on the way to winning the gold in the 400-meter hurdle as she finished the race 51.46 seconds. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Very interesting. Obama's scaling back his party because of the Delta variant of infections. I guess he's bowing to public pressure on this. I am not necessarily shocked that Obama would have a party of 700 people. And look, if the people are vaccinated and everything else, I don't know. I don't necessarily see a huge thing with it, providing the people are vaccinated and masked and everything else. I guess the catch is, how could those people be that way if there's going to be a party and if they're going to be socializing and everything else? And with the case counts going up, well, Obama is listening to public pressure, I suppose. The story I want to get to, and this was going to be my monologue, but I guess I can go to something else as a monologue. The CDC has identified a legal authority for a new and different moratorium that would be for areas with high substantial increases in COVID-19 infections. Now, if you remember, the government had allocated, let's say, $40 billion to deal with renters and homeowners basically falling in the rears of their rent and not being able to pay their rent. Well, a fraction of that money gets spent. And because a fraction of that money gets spent, you have basically what gets kicked down the can, or kicked down the corner of an issue of housing crisis, where you have all of these renters and all of these people not able to pay their rent, dealing with issues associated with COVID, and it goes month to month to month. The CDC had a moratorium in place. The Supreme Court basically said the CDC shouldn't be able to do that, in which case they had one more month. That month was the end of July. So the question became, what is going to happen to all of these people who are perpetually insecure regarding their rent? What is going to happen? Are they going to be thrown out of their homes? Are you going to have tens of millions of Americans kicked out of their homes? And why is it okay to have this problem kicked down the curve, kicked down the corner in the first place? All of these people perpetually in danger. This goes on for 11 months, by the way. Think about that. What does it mean to be in your home and not knowing whether you're going to be able to be in your home for the next month or in the month after that? Problematic. Everybody pointed the finger at one another in regards to who was responsible. So Nancy Pelosi puts out a tweet. Hey, the Biden administration needs to do something. Biden, Psaki, come out. Hey, Congress needs to do something. Everybody pointing fingers at each other and allowing this to come to the very end in the way that it came. Cori Bush and some members of Congress, Cori Bush specifically, went on a housing. I mean, she basically protested outside of Congress, sleeping out there for multiple nights in order to get attention to this specific issue. She shouldn't have had to do that. She shouldn't have had to do that. But because of the attention she drew to this, well, you've had a situation where the Biden administration has basically found something else that they could use to, I guess you can say, as a fig leaf to create another moratorium. And even though the moratorium is limited, meaning it's 60 days, and again, for the life of me, if a person couldn't necessarily pay the rent 2 months in the arrears, I don't necessarily know how they're going to pay it 8 months in the arrears. But from the standpoint of a moment of respite, yes. And from the standpoint of whether or not something like this should have been done in the first place, I think the weird thing to me is the CDC is doing this. Why is the CDC doing this? Like, why is this in the purview of the CDC? And is there some level of a failure that the CDC is the device that has to do this? This should take an act of Congress. No more, no less. And for as long as the CDC is doing this, there are going to be all sorts of legal challenges going after the CDC doing this, just like there were prior. The Supreme Court was the thing that basically told the CDC that they couldn't necessarily use the previous device that they were using for the moratorium. Well, I suspect it's a matter of time before this one gets hit also. And of course, we're going to have to look further into the details in regards to what they're using for this. But there's something wrong with this. And it's not that I'm not, yes, good job, Cori Bush. She should get all the credit in the world. And for the people that are basically poo-pooing this and saying, oh, these guys were doing theater and everything else. Well, it was theater for the point of real results, which she did get. And it's real results for the people who are going to be kicked out of their homes. So it's just something weird and bizarre that we don't have the ability to just get basic things done. And by basic things, I mean, hey, you had a crisis. Yes. Okay. Within the context of that crisis, you have a lot of people who are financially insecure, going to be kicked out of their homes. Yes. Great. All right. So, of course, the device to deal with this is the Centers for Disease Control. What? No. The device to deal with this is your Congress, your government. The idea that they're putting this off to the CDC is just problematic to me, and it's just weird and bizarre, and gets across this notion that these guys, something is wrong. Something is fundamentally wrong. There's one more story, and we actually have this clip. Andre, could you load this clip for me? I'll give a moment to load it. In New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio has announced the start of a city program called Key to New York City Pass. As a pressure to get people vaccinated, the program will require proof of vaccination for both workers and customers at indoor businesses, including restaurants, gyms, and entertainment venues, and performances such as movies, concerts, and Broadway. Now, I have no issue with this. Thank you. I have no issue with this. And I've been going back and forth with people on it and everything else. What it seems to me, it seems that people who are vaccinated are okay with being in a venue with other people who are vaccinated. And people who are not vaccinated are concerned about being excluded from those venues. But you must understand, just like you have that individual liberty to not get vaccinated, I have an individual liberty to congregate with people who are. Let's play this clip of de Blasio.
The Key to NYC Pass will be a first-in-the-nation approach. It will require vaccination for workers and customers in indoor dining, in indoor fitness facilities, indoor entertainment facilities. This is going to be a requirement. The only way to patronize these establishments indoors will be if you're vaccinated, at least one dose. The same for folks in terms of work. They'll need at least one dose. This is crucial because we know that this will encourage a lot more vaccination. We've seen it already.
So there's a few things. He's right. It will probably increase the number of vaccinations, just like Biden's program, where he was given, I think he was trying to get the states or the city locality to give people $100. And people poo-pooed this and they laughed at this. And I think I even laughed at this because it gets across, okay, our original plan failed. But if you think about it, if your target is a younger demographic to get them vaccinated, well, the younger demographic is the demographic that will be least likely to have ends and money in the bank. And so the $100 is not necessarily a bad idea. From the standpoint of these guys in Cuomo, it's one vaccination dose. Now, Shane made the point, well, one vaccination dose is not going to be the thing that protects people. They need both in order to be protected. And even with the context of Delta variants these days, the one dose seems dodgy. And the point that I made to Shane was it seems like these guys are trying to find a middle ground where they're trying to say, all right, we don't want a situation where businesses are going to get hurt in New York City if we can't get enough people to get the vaccinations. Meaning, if people call our bluff and they don't get those vaccine doses, which means they can't go to those businesses, and those businesses can't get back to normal, et cetera, et cetera. One dose allows them this middle ground between those things of trying to say, okay, we're going to try to lean towards businesses, but we're also going to try to incentivize people to get the vaccination dose. Look, I don't necessarily have an issue with this. I don't like it in the grand scheme of things. Like I said before, I'm not a big fan of it. By the same token, what are you going to do? Are we going to allow a situation where people just get sick? And the original plan didn't seem to work. And when you have something now like Delta variant that can basically break through on some level of the vaccinations, then all of us at some level are at risk. I don't have an issue with this. I don't have an issue with this at all. And I'm going to talk to a doctor in the very next segment, Dr. Mikhail Kogan, and we're going to have a conversation, and hopefully we can make clear why I don't have an issue with this and why this actually may be a model for the nation going forward. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment with Dr. Mikhail Kogan.
Fault Lines.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm typically joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. There was an election yesterday, special election, actually. We talked about it a little bit the day before, and this has to do with Nina Turner. And I know I said going into Dr. Kogan. Dr. Kogan is going to be in the very next segment after this. Nina Turner was running against Chantel Brown. Now, Nina Turner was basically the favorite of lefties. Chantel was the favorite of the establishment. And in that race, you had a weird break and a weird dynamic where you still had this establishment versus non-establishment, this kind of Bernie versus Clinton dynamic that still perpetuated itself even to today. If you remember, Nina Turner backed Sanders. She stomped for Sanders. She was within Sanders' campaign. She was a hard push for him, actually. Very strong advocate. Fiery speeches. Firebrand, to put it mildly. And if I'm being honest, I haven't heard much from Chantel Brown, short of the people who are backing Chantel Brown. Let's say the Clyburns of the world, or the Hillary Clintons of the world, et cetera, et cetera. Nina Turner had a good chance to win this race. Now, she had name recognition. And not just name recognition, again, from the standpoint of the lefties, she had somewhat of an organized group. Nevertheless, Nina Turner lost this race. Chantel Brown, 50.18%. Nina Turner, 44.52%. Now this, I have to be honest, is somewhat of a painful loss. And if you think about it, if for the moment this was Cori Bush, you realize if Cori Bush wasn't in Congress, meaning if she was one of these lefties that didn't get in office, it's very possible that the homeowners thing, the rental thing, would have just lapsed, that there wouldn't have been a push for it. Meaning somebody as influential as Bush, meaning for what Bush just did, was basically kept out of Congress for somebody who would not be influential, who would absolutely be a team player, and who would definitely toe whatever the Democratic Party line is. This was a big loss. And it's a big loss for the left. And on some level, there needs to be this kind of question of why. Yes, It is true that a huge amount of money was dropped in at the last minute to go against Turner, super PACs and everything else trying to keep her out. You had many groups, basically, let's say Friends of Israel, that went after her because of her position on Palestine. And you had, like I said, third-way Democratic groups dropping all of the money in the world to try to stop her. Nevertheless, could Nina Turner have won this race? We're going to have to get somebody in from Ohio to talk about this. I mean, because this is somewhat of a big deal. Nina Turner is a big, big name. In March, the seat was vacated. This was Ohio 11th, when Representative Marcia Fudge stepped down to become Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under President Joe Biden. I remember this campaign going on. There was this hope and belief that there was going to be a new member of the squad that was going to take into effect, come into play for Ohio. Not so much. Not so much. I think the question for the left is why? Why did she fail? Could you really put it just at the, at the door of, well, I mean, there was a lot of money that was used against her. Or, well, it was the establishment pick. Or Clyburn, he's a kingmaker. He's just a kingmaker. That's all he is. He has magical powers. What is it about this race? What was it about Nina Turner that was the thing that prevented her from taking the seat? Because by all estimates, at least by the things that people were saying, anyway, her chances look quite good. I just read the top part. The racially diverse, reliably Democratic 11th district stretches from Cleveland's east side to Akron, with a mix of working to upper-class suburbs, including Euclid and Shaker Heights. The district backed by Biden by a margin of 60 percentage points, 79.8 to 19.2 over President Donald Trump in 2022. Nina Turner was asked the question recently about, I believe, on whether or not she voted for Clinton. Now, this is somewhat of a difficult question, and it shouldn't be a difficult question because your answer, if you're running in a Democratic primary, should just be automatically yes. You need people to vote for you, and some of the people who you need to vote for you are not hardcore lefties and are not people who are going to take kindly to you even questioning or not answering that question or have a difficult time answering that question. Also, there's this question about Democratic establishment and the strength and the weight of that establishment in regards to a candidate running for office. Was it her policies? Or was it the people who she was associated with? Which one was it? If you remember, the Congressional Black Caucus was for Shontel Brown. You had Biden. You had the mainstream Democrats for Shontel Brown. And yet, it was the belief that Turner had enough gusto to be able to overcome all of that. And despite not having the same name recognition, Shontel Brown was able to overcome this and win this contest and is going to be going to Congress as a reliable partner of the Democratic Party. She has Clyburn to thank for it. She has all sorts of, let's say, institutional assistance to thank for it. But the reality of it is, but what does it mean for the people of Ohio? And in the context of, let's say, policy and what these guys are pushing for and what these guys want to accomplish, there's a vast difference between these two people. Yeah, this is a painful loss. And I would imagine many people on the left who liked Turner, who followed Turner in her career, this is a painful loss. And look, even Sanders stomped for, AOC stomped for. You had these big names that came out stomping for, and it still wasn't enough. And I guess I'm stuck looking at this morning. I mean, because I just saw this coming out this morning, and I'm stuck with this question about what does it mean? What does it mean? I mean, it wasn't like Nina Turner wasn't part of the community. She was. So that can't be an excuse. Oh, this is some outsider that came in. It's not that. It can't be that Nina Turner, didn't know Ohio. She clearly knew Ohio. She was, born and bred. And so it becomes, what is it about this race? And no, the results and everything else where you can kind of piece through the details and everything else hasn't come out yet. But I am greatly curious about this. The left has to pay attention to this. I'm sorry. You have to wonder why. Yes, you can say a bunch of money. Yes, you can use all of those things, but all of those things were going to be true anyway. If you remember, Nina Turner was the one that they basically disallowed giving the speech for Sanders. When Sanders was backing Hillary, giving a speech for Hillary, they disallowed her giving her speech. It was punishment of sorts. And so this punishment, of course, wasn't necessarily going to just stop. Then it was going to continue on. But the interesting thing to me is, why did she lose? Why did she lose? That's what I'm curious about. Less about what Chantel Brown is going to do in the spot. I don't expect much. More so, what was the reason that she lost? And is this, I guess, can something be learned here in this race to be applicable to other races that lefties are running in? One last point. Whoever wins this will win the seat. So it's one of those things where this is a Democratic constituency. It's very clear. And so basically Chantel Brown will be the next House of Representative for Ohio in the 11th. Yeah, it's unfortunate. It hurts. It hurts greatly. I am very curious from the standpoint of Chantel Brown and for Nina Turner. This got pretty contentious towards the end, by the way. That's something else that needs to be brought up. As this got towards the final and towards the closing, yeah, it got pretty contentious in regards to the sides. But at the end of the day, these guys are getting they're making she won. One of the things that Chantel Brown was able to do on some level was to wrap Nina Turner into this larger, let's say, progressive narrative. This notion that, yeah, she may be governing, but she's a thin slice. She's only a thin slice. She's not a team player. She's something else. And again, we're going to have to figure out whether or not that's going to be the thing that was the winning message. This is Turner. I am eternally grateful, she told a group of supporters on Tuesday night. I am completely overwhelmed by all of you that showed up and showed out on my behalf. This was a collaborative partnership and the community. She added, this isn't an all or nothing thing. This is about making progress. Sometimes it takes compromise. Yes. So the question becomes, what's next? Where does Nina Turner go? NPR reported on Tuesday that Turner's spokesman revealed that the campaign had raised $5.7 million, while Brown campaign took in about $2.6 million. Now, this doesn't include super PACs and everything else. It was basically dumping a ton of money towards the end of this race. Here's another part. Turner spoke to Insider in March and explained the need to combat economic inequities, a huge issue in the Rust Belt district. Quote, having one job should definitely be enough, and we've got to work to make sure that that's the case, she said. COVID has only exacerbated social and economic, racial, and environmental fissures, and we need to center poor people and working class people in a way that gives them the shot to live the measure of the American dream. This is going to require us to see the system through a different lens. That was her campaign, basically. That's basically her campaign. If you're looking for a way to encapsulate what Nina Turner was pushing and what her message was. And just to make this point that much more clear, Cori Bush did not live a privileged life. She had all sorts of economic difficulty and depravity that she had to deal with. Now, the catch becomes, does that inform your point of view in Congress? Of course it does. If something burns into you, it clearly informs your point of view. And do you want people in Congress who have a point of view informed by real life? To me, the answer is yes. And to me, the reason that Cori Bush was out there and the reason that the other people were going to let it basically go by was because it dug into her and it burned into her. Having a campaign centered along the issues of real human beings as opposed to, let's say, $100 million Nancy Pelosi, having a campaign centered on real issues will give you different results. This was a loss. And I would say for the left, yes, but I would say in a larger sense for this country. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm typically joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan. He's not feeling well today, but he'll be back. We're coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We do the COVID numbers every day. And we do that because we try to prioritize people's mind on, okay, this is what's taking place around the country. Well, one of the numbers that was somewhat bothersome to me, to put it mildly, and I guess worrying, not just to me, but to other people, especially people in the scientific community, was right here. So a sobering scientific analysis published Friday found that 3/4 of the people infected during an explosive coronavirus outbreak fueled by the Delta variant were fully vaccinated. Fully vaccinated. The report on Massachusetts cases from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention offers key evidence to bolster the hypothesis that vaccinated people can spread the virus. The wild part about it is right here. The data detailed in CDC's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report helped persuade agency scientists to reverse recommendations on mask wearing and advise that vaccinated individuals wear masks indoor public settings in certain circumstances. Critically, the study found that vaccinated individuals carried as much virus in their noses as unvaccinated individuals, strongly suggesting that the vaccinated could spread the virus to others. This was a worrying study, and I read that with a lump in my throat. To have a conversation about it, we're joined with Dr. Jamarl Thomas. He's medical director at George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, associate professor of medicine at George Washington University, and founder and executive director of the AIM Health Institute, a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the underserved. Dr. Kogan, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. How are you guys?
I'm doing all right. I read that study, I think it was maybe last week, and I thought to myself, well, yes, it definitely didn't kill anybody, meaning it kept people from dying. It definitely kept people from getting ill. By the same token, I don't want to get sick at all. And that complicates somewhat of a message as you're trying to explain this. It's far easier for me to say, look, 99% of the people that ended up sick or in a hospital were basically people who are unvaccinated. That is a very clear, straightforward message. What is your take on this? I mean, how do you frame this? Is this worrisome? Is this expected? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're beginning to see that vaccines are starting to drop their rate of efficacy. To be honest with you, I don't think it's anything unexpected, right? I mean, when the pandemic started, the messaging was very clear. This virus mutates rapidly.
Dr. Kogan, can we do this? Let us call you back. We're hearing like a click or something in the connection or in the phone line, but we'll call you right back. But yeah, just as a heads up, he's right. The efficacy seems to be going down, but it needs to be made clear though. Something needs to be made clear. Just because the efficacy may be going down from the standpoint of you're not bulletproof, it is still pretty clear that the people who are vaccinated didn't die or didn't necessarily get overtly ill. It was a protection. And it was clear protection, even within the context of this Massachusetts study. And people were complaining and people were very angry about the new mask guidance where they were saying, okay, people need to wear masks indoors now. However, if you think about it, I mean, this is basically the guidance prior, and nobody wants to do this. Like no administration would ever want to get involved and say, okay, we're going to countermand our guidance, because it makes it seem as if whatever you were doing failed, and no administration want to come across as if they got it wrong. Dr. Jamarl Kogan, thank you. Oh, please continue.
Yeah, so, I think we knew from the beginning of the pandemic that the virus is fast mutating. So whatever the vaccine development would happen, it won't last forever, meaning that, the vaccine will have to get updated and eventually will start losing its efficacy. So I don't think there's anything surprising or unexpected. I actually think that vaccine is still holding up reasonably okay. Of course, it's concerning.
Yeah.
I mean, it's concerning mostly for the fact that it means that, well, we talked about this. I was very clear from the get-go, herd immunity is a dream. We'll never get there. So I think this just proves that fact.
Yeah, it seems that because they're saying that the transmissibility of this is somewhere near chickenpox or more, virulent than the common cold. I mean, that's pretty extreme.
It's extreme. I mean, it's extreme, and that's what's said is that we hoped that vaccine will decrease amount of transmissibility, meaning that people who are vaccinated, when they do get it, they will transmit less because they don't carry as much of the virus. Turns out that actually that's not the case. So that's probably the most worrisome development, to be honest with you. However, it's still the best treatment we have in a way, right, or the best prophylaxis we have, simply because the deaths and severe illnesses in patients who've been vaccinated is extremely low.
Yeah, I think it's like 99 right here. Outcomes for COVID-19 in America, not tested positive for COVID-19, 99.92% or something like that of unvaccinated.
I mean, the deaths, you can count them on fingers, basically.
Yes, yes. I mean, so that's the catch. It's like, yes, there may be breakthrough. By the same token, those people are not dying.
Right. And I mean, I think that is the message. And I think there's even more reason to get vaccinated. Now, what's said is that it looks like, let's say you have a household where, you were trying to vaccinate everybody because there's a vulnerable person. And we were hoping that that would protect that person. Well, no, not really. That's basically the message. The message is that everybody should get vaccinated, not necessarily for other people, but for themselves. And I think that's a change. That's a change from the prior conversations, from how we were saying, look, let's try to vaccinate as many people. Let's try to vaccinate kids and teenagers so that we protect others. Well, it turns out this may not work as well as we hoped.
Because basically they build as much of the virus as people who are unvaccinated.
Still infect others after being vaccinated. That's the reality. Now, I still think that it's not a sort of a done deal in terms of the evidence, meaning they're still looking at a lot more data, and more data is needed simply to compare what is an actual true transmissibility comparing vaccinated and unvaccinated. So is there some proportion of protection that we don't know? It's different to say, look, the amount of carried virus is the same, but is that virus transmissible or not? I know that we just have to wait for the live data to gradually accumulate over the next weeks.
I see. Those are different things. I see.
Things.
How do they know that the Delta variant has been the main variant in the United States up to this point?
Well, I actually don't think it's a great question. I don't exactly know the answer. I believe that there are continuous research efforts, meaning that there's a surveillance going through the CDC where certain samples are sent over there where they test for specific area. But a regular physician like me cannot order separating tests. Like I can't order a test saying, look, I want to know if this is Delta or something else.
Yeah.
So it's for research purposes only. So I'm assuming that there's a sampling going on from each area. But obviously, you can't send all the tests. So you're gonna send some proportion. So it's a very critical question you're asking. I mean, is there a chance that there's some kind of error in collection of the data and reporting? I don't think so. It's probably pretty representative. I'm assuming it's some kind of a random selection that is representative of the larger population at the location that's being surveyed.
From your standpoint as a doctor, I mean, you're dealing basically with this and people coming in with this. Have you seen, let's say, an increase in the number of people who are coming in with these kind of medical ailments associated with this?
No, not yet. I mean, I think our areas, District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia, I think our rates of vaccinations have been higher. So we're a little on a sort of a delayed spectrum here, I think, and we haven't really seen. I've heard of a couple of my patients getting a mild illness, just going through it, testing positive, but having very little symptoms. And then I had few friends in Boston area who also got, or just told me that they kind of got through it quickly. So it's so far everybody who I've heard about had very mild symptoms, but none of my patients contacted me yet for actually asking for assistance, assuming it's a Delta, because, we have to assume that anybody who's sick post-vaccine who gets the COVID after the vaccine probably have Delta.
Interesting. I'm curious, have they noticed any kind of differences in the long-term COVID effects of people with the different variations of the virus?
Yeah.
Because some of the mutations were significant. And so I'm wondering if the mutations had different, effects what the person experienced.
I don't know. I think we have to wait. I think the assumption will be that people who've been vaccinated and then contracted the Delta probably going to have a lot less long-term post-COVID effects because the immune system going to recognize the virus faster, going to clear it faster. Thus, your length of inflammatory response is going to be shorter, and you're probably not going to get to the kind of a long hauler, what we call, or long-term inflammatory response post-COVID. But I'm speculating, to be honest with you. I mean, we're still dealing with an influx of the people who got sick 12 months ago.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
This is not, we're still in that window. For the long-term effects, we're not going to see patients for months after they get over it.
Yeah.
So I think what's going to happen with long-term symptoms after Delta, it's anybody's guess. I'm assuming with anything more virulent, we should have more symptoms in patients who had a full-blown in unvaccinated situation.
Yeah.
What will happen with patients who have vaccine, I don't know. My assumption is we're going to have less long-term patients who will be presenting to us with ongoing symptoms.
Just because of the high vaccination rates. That makes sense. And I expected less deaths also because half of the country is vaccinated as compared to what was before. Have you had to have conversations with your patients about the vaccination? And have you had to try to, these kind of personal, it's like, dude, I need, I can't force you to do it. I'm your doctor. I'm just trying to give you good advice, et cetera. What was that conversation? If you can tell. I mean, I'm not asking you to go into a specific patient. I'm not doing that.
No, I know.
Yeah.
It's very individual each time. I vividly remember one older woman who I think we talked about her. She was very clear that this disease doesn't even exist, and why would I take a vaccine against something that's a hoax? So there's that. I mean, I think that's there's no point to try to.
Yeah, you can't convince that person. That person, a flat earther.
I find more fascinating discussions, even among my colleagues, who some of them don't believe in the vaccine, and they keep saying something, are you taking prophylactic ivermectin?
Really?
Prophylactic ivermectin. Did you last look at the side effect profile of that drug, and did you realize that it can kill your liver? But so in the cases like this, my stand is simple. I explain my logic. I say, look, this is what it is. I don't try to push people. But, I think the situation here gets a little more dire because, we know that the variant is a lot worse if you're unvaccinated and if you get it. Does any other methods are of any efficacy at all at prophylaxis? I'd probably say borderline. I mean, optimize your immune system with everything we discussed in the past. Sure. No guarantee. I think vaccine is still the best we have. That's all we can really tell to people, to be honest with you. And then they have to just make their own decision. Now, I think the bigger issue is the consistency of messaging. I think if we all send the same message, I do see some improvement in that overall, I think. I think there's sort of a more consistency in overall from what I'm sensing. And then patients still take shots. I think there's a uptick in adolescent vaccinations, although, again, here's a good example. I'm going to kind of question wisdom here. Mm-hmm. We just said 2 minutes ago that now really the main reason to get vaccinated is protect yourself, not somebody else. So with that in mind, with kids having so few real severe illness, is that worth it? Right? So now it becomes a little bit more difficult conversation. It's probably still worth it simply because actual risk of COVID in adolescents still exists, meaning they can still get quite sick.
You mean talking about kids?
The chance is much less.
Yeah, but with kids going to school, I mean, does that...
That's right. That's the thing. The kids are going to go to school. Maryland mandates masks.
Right.
Virginia, D.C., we yet to see that. They're going to be way more exposed.
Because, by the way, when we're thinking of the Massachusetts case, I mean, that was somewhat of a perfect storm for COVID. I mean, we're talking about like a party spot. People are probably going to be closer. People who are vaccinated are probably going to feel more bulletproof. I think it was like a 70% rates. I mean, so they had a very high rate of number of people. So the only people that would be around would be people who would.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. I think this is one of the best natural experiments we currently have and can talk about. We know that they were in a very close proximity. We know that most people, if not everybody, have not weared any protection, so there was no masking of any kind. We know that nobody died from 400, I forgot how many, 400 plus people.
Yeah.
And the rate of vaccination was very low. So it was a very mild illness, but 75% of those patients were vaccinated. So this is an example of, I think, what's to come.
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting at with kids. Like, because I know some people make the argument about whether kids should be vaccinated or not. I guess it depends on whether or not you and those kids go to school. If those kids are going to be in close proximity with one another, I just kind of compare it to that. It's like, are kids going to die, or do they have a higher propensity not to get sick? Yes, that's probably true. But if you put those kids kind of in a pressure cooker together, will their propensity for illness potentially go up? And my thought is yes.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, so I'm very curious about what they're going to do from the standpoint of kids, schooling, and everything else. But let's do this. Let's take a break. I'm going to bring you back. The voice that you guys are listening to is Dr. Mikhail Kogan. Dr. Mikhail Kogan is medical director at the George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, associate professor of medicine at George Washington University, and founder and executive director of AIM Health Institute, a DC-based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the underserved. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I tend to be joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan. He'll be back later this week. But we're coming to you out of our station in Washington, D.C., and we're having a conversation about COVID. Basically, all things COVID from the standpoint of a family or medical doctor's perspective. Dr. Mikhail Kogan, we're joined with Dr. Mikhail Kogan. He's medical director at the George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, associate professor of medicine at George Washington University, founder and executive director of AIM Health Institute, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the underserved. And speaking about that, delivering services to the underserved, how have you seen that propagate itself during COVID, if that makes sense? Meaning people with means versus not means, and dealing with people without during this COVID crisis. First, I guess the question is, what has been the distinction between those things, and how have you had to deal with it?
Yeah, let me be very critical of what's going on and sort of tell you the sad reality. I think the COVID highlighted the discrepancies from people who have money and people who don't. I have seen people who've had COVID in a Medicare population and who really can't afford kind of a, high-end, quick access. And because of that, they waited too long, and then they had a lot more complications, and now we're sort of managing it many months later. And I will tell you, unfortunately, currently, that is a very big discrepancy, and it's growing. And again, we always knew that there's a big gap in the quality of care and in outcomes between patients, basically, who have money and who don't. And COVID not only underlined it and kind of, further put it in front of us, but COVID also highlighted something quite critical. It's not just all about access. It's actually also about being able to purchase certain services that is simply not considered standard of care. So it takes a while.
Give me an example.
Anything. Yeah, so anything takes a long time to get standard of care. Like when you have an experimental therapy, like in the beginning when remdesivir was coming on the market, right? I mean, if you had connections, you could get it really quickly. Now, it's a bad example because it's borderline effective, if any. But there are other treatments. I mean, there is a nutritional treatments. There's lots of things out there that people can do that all have some benefits, but only people who have time and money that can really afford it. And when you're talking about kind of a routine conditions where standard of care is very well developed and well understood and covered, it's fine. But here you have a situation where pretty much no standard of care exists, or if it exists, it's just been established. It's not very effective once you develop the disease. So basically, the only thing you have is vaccine. But beyond the vaccine, what you get is actually very heavily depends on who you are, where you live, what your insurance is. And you know, and everybody keeps saying like, oh no, if you have COVID, everything will be covered.
Yeah, but that's not true. That's still not true.
That's not true at all.
No.
In fact, I would say it's less covered if you have a COVID than if you don't, because again, what I just said, there's just a lot more things out there that are considered non-standard, and because they're not standard, they're not covered. Or if they are covered, you have to pay for them cash first and then submit. And then you'll get it back, but you know, you have to put out cash up front, which actually a lot of people just can't simply do.
Right. They don't necessarily have. And that doesn't even get into the thing of like, depending upon your income status, whether or not you had to work versus not. Meaning, you know, the lower end jobs didn't have the capability of working from home, so they were further online. The food that people get, like all of those things come into play. Whether or not person can take, let's say, supplements that might enhance their physical capabilities as opposed to.
Exactly right.
You know, all of those things play a role in it, and all of those things are dependent on some level on income.
As we're seeing a lot of long haulers, people who have money, you know, they can get through it. They can arrange their life around the illness. People on a limited income, if they don't work, now what? Right?
Yeah.
Often there's no safety net at all. So, I mean, that's the scary part. The scary part is that basically if you already don't have a lot of protected income and this happens to you, you're basically losing everything.
Yeah.
At least people are not getting evicted at the moment, right? So that's like one news. So if you can't afford your rent, you're not going to get evicted. But, I mean, eventually that will end. Housing is not the only thing. What about food and everything else?
Yeah. It's the totality of that stuff that comes into play. What do you think is going to take place going forward with us? I mean, just from a basic, you know, us dealing with it. Because it's weird. It's almost like we deal with the flu every year. But this is not the flu. It's that.
Flu. It's bad. It's much worse than a flu. We've been through this before in this discussion, comparing it to flu. It's a lot worse.
Yeah, it's far worse. I guess what I'm saying is, though, it seems that it's just going to stick around. It seems like it's not going anywhere. Sure. It's lingering.
It's going to stick around. It's going to linger for a long time. I'm guessing that after Delta, we're going to have whatever next letter. And, you know, and it's going to be, again, it's going to keep coming in waves like this, you know. Eventually, I think the vaccines are going to get modified, so they're going to get more and more effective against the next strains. But it's always going to be a catch-up game. It's going to probably remind us of what's going on with antibiotics, where we constantly have to catch up. And because of that, we won't be able to be ahead of it.
Are you concerned about superbugs? So for example, I remember one time when I was younger, I caught a virus or caught a bacteria in the hospital itself. And, you know, this was a super bug. The vaccines didn't necessarily, not the vaccines, but the antibiotics didn't necessarily work against it. And so they ended up using this kind of new class of vaccine that had like literally just came out like a year prior or something to that effect. Otherwise, their option was going to be basically to cut away at the skin in order to get off the, you know, that type of stuff. This is gross stuff. Is there any concern of like superbugs that are originated from the people who are basically vaccinated, where it has to overcome the vaccination in order to?
Right. No, I don't think so. I think there's a lot of conspiracies going around. I think that's definitely one of those things that it just has nothing to do with the situation.
Basically, viruses mutate as is.
I'm concerned about this becoming a flu, just being much worse than the flu, and just keeps going around. And another bad thing is, you know, we know the flu tends to be seasonal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we know how it circulates. This thing doesn't seem to like care what the season of the year is, right? It's just kind of, it's gonna come and go based more on some weird local changes plus its rates of mutations. So will we eventually get ahead of it? We probably will. The question is, what is the timing here? And I must say, I don't think we're looking at the year or two. I think we're looking at 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and we will have the spikes like this. We're just going to basically live with them. The one thing that's really positive is that the mortality rate dropped dramatically.
Yes.
And we're probably going to maintain that. But that doesn't mean that the system won't get strained constantly, right? It doesn't mean that economically we're going to suffer tremendously, because a lot of people, we just talked about this, right? A lot of people going to have prolonged illness, going to lose everything. So they're going to go on some kind of assistance. They're going to have to be carried by the government. That's going to keep getting worse, not necessarily better, because if we don't have long-term solutions for these patients and they're not improving after 12 months, you're going to start gradually accumulate number of such people living in a society. So that may present itself a huge challenge. Right now, I've seen the numbers, something like each complicated COVID case takes up about $500,000 from the society. So on average. So that's a massive amount of money if you think about this. Now, we are getting better at everything. We're getting better at managing these patients. They're treated shorter. So I think that's kind of the worst case scenario. Probably going to start looking gradually better and better. But it's going to keep being added on. That's the problem. So, if we can resolve these patients after a month, we'd be okay, because we'd be constantly in waves, worse, better, worse, better. Here, it'll still be worse, better, worse, better, worse, better, but the total number of people with long-term symptoms are going to linger more and more unless we really get ahead and vaccinate everybody, which...
That doesn't seem to be the case.
A big if.
Yeah, that doesn't seem to happen.
We're stuck, right? We're stuck at under 50% for the nation, and I don't think that in the last few weeks numbers have been improving at all.
No, it's like, I've been reporting here. It seems like we've been stuck at 48% forever. Right. And we ticked up to 49%. There seems to be an anger towards the vaccinated or the unvaccinated that I think are growing among people who got vaccinated, thinking, this kind of unempathy or that it's like, dude, you're making this bad for all of us. I guess that's the feeling associated with it, because it feels like that the more people who are unvaccinated is a higher propensity or an opportunity for the thing to mutate and to propagate. It's that feel to it. Not to mention the resources that are used if people who are uninsured, who get sick and that type of stuff, and we have to pay that stuff out of our own pockets through taxes and whatnot. I don't know. It's a collective thing in a weird way, and shows us that we are connected as human beings, despite the fact that we tend to deny that in all the things that we end up doing throughout the course of our society. I'm curious, if you had a magic wand, and I like using this, just if a person had a magic wand and you could snap your finger, and you could basically say, look, going forward, from my perspective, dealing with this from my perch, what would need to be done for the nation for this to be, let's say, handled? I don't necessarily expect like magic and, okay, I can snap my finger and it goes away. More so from a policy standpoint. And I mean this from either going all the way to the bottom. Like, how would this be done if this was a systemic policy approach to trying to deal with this and resolve this, including the medical bills associated with it? I mean, I think there are over 30 million people who've been infected.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is, given how complex our healthcare system is and how inefficient it is, I wish I could tell you there's going to be a magic wand, and I wish I could list you like a list of 20 things that do to improve it, but it's all utopia, because in reality, none of this is going to happen. I think the best thing we can do is not to sort of wait for any healthcare system changes. I think that if I were to have magic wand, I would sort of tell to the people, say, look, these are the things you can do to more protect yourself. And those are the things: optimize your nutrition and your immune system and get the vaccine. And that's pretty much it. And try to not waste time on looking around for sort of quote unquote magic solutions that somebody puts out there. Yeah. Reality is,
Dr. Kogan, we're going to have to end it there. The voice that you guys are listening to is Dr. Mikhail Kogan, Medical Director at George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas, and the left corner will be the only corner today. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get to the headlines. I always enjoy speaking with Dr. Mikhail Kogan. He knows his stuff. And he often makes an argument about the physical being itself, meaning it's not necessarily somebody else's job to basically medicine you if you can do things to kind of keep your physical system up in a way where it doesn't necessarily fall over at the first bug that it meets. He makes a great point. Let's get to the headlines. In the news, about 149,788 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, and there were about 668 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 92,005 cases per day, an increase of 139% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 50% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 58% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 35,325,243 people across the United States and has killed a greatly unfortunate 614,104 men, women, and children across the country. And the note here, we haven't seen this high a single caseload since the first days of February, near the peak of the winter sickness season. To give you some context. Speaking of people who are at fault, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has stated that the state will not, NOT, go into another lockdown. This comes after Florida broke their own COVID case count Friday, hitting 21,683 new infections for the day. And in July, the state accounted for 40% of the country's total infections. Great job, DeSantis. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has been found to have sexually harassed women by the investigators appointed by the New York Attorney General's Letitia James, reportedly violating state and federal law. This follows a publicized interview between two investigators and Cuomo just the day before, in which Cuomo suggested one of the pair had an axe to grind. President Biden has called for Cuomo's resignation as governor. In fact, calls for resignation as governor has been from all corners at this point, including many of which Democrats. In New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio has announced the start of a city program called Key to New York City Pass. As a pressure to get people vaccinated, the program will require proof of vaccination for both workers and customers at indoor businesses, including restaurants, gyms, and entertainment venues and performances such as movies, concerts, and Broadway. The CDC has identified a legal authority for a new and different moratorium that would be for areas with high and substantial increases in COVID-19 infections. The Biden administration is set to announce the new 60-day program today and will protect areas where 90% of Americans live. And look, credit had to be given to Cori Bush on this. She was sleeping outside over the course of the last several days to try to get attention drawn on this very specific issue that tens of millions of people are going to lose their homes. Former President Barack Obama has reportedly scaled back his 60th birthday party due to rising Delta variant cases, and after receiving pushback for the scale and intensity of the party compared to rumblings of a return to lockdowns, mandated masks, and even vaccines, and a worsening COVID situation overall. The party, which would have been held on Martha's Vineyard with an attendance of approximately 700, including staff, has been reduced to include only family and close friends. Yesterday, Human Rights Watch released a report criticizing some Lebanese government officials, saying that they, quote, tactically accepted the risk, unquote, of storing ammonium nitrate in the portside warehouse that set fire then exploded last year, catastrophically damaging the city's ports and much of the surrounding infrastructure and killing hundreds. Lebanon's caretaker government called the report faulty and said that it, quote, deviates from the truth, unquote. Deviates from the truth. Firefighters in Greece raced to contain a fire that forced the evacuation of thousands near Athens. Temperatures in parts of the country are as high as 45 degrees Celsius or 113 degrees Fahrenheit. The fire is burning on the outskirts of Athens through nearby forests and destroyed dozens of homes. Has destroyed dozens of homes. So far, the medal leaders in order are the United States, China, Russia athletes, Great Britain, and Japan. China has the most gold medals with 32, following the United States with 25, which follows Japan with 20. Kristina Simenovskaya, the Belarusian sprinter who refused to fly home, left Japan this morning and boarded a flight to Vienna after spending a night at a secure hotel under Japanese police protection. She will be transported to Poland after she lands, where she has been granted a visa. U.S. women's basketball team won their 53rd game in a row after blowing out Australia 79-55 behind Brianna Stewart's 23 points. Next up, they'll face Serbia in the semifinals on Friday. And last, U.S. hurdler Sydney McLaughlin set a world record on her way to winning the gold in the 400 hurdles as she finished the race 51.26 seconds. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I want to get to one of a chart, or let's say, a chart. Axios often has these really, really good charts. It's like snapshot news bits. And it asks the question, who is to blame for rising COVID-19 cases? And it's asking the question based on vaccination status. Meaning, if you're vaccinated, what do you think? Versus if you're unvaccinated, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? So, who is to blame for COVID-19 cases by vaccination status? The vaccinated blame to the tune of 78.6% the unvaccinated. I love that. So 78% of people who got the vaccination blame the unvaccinated as being responsible. The vaccinated, 35% blame Donald Trump, 33% blame conservative media, 29% blame foreign travelers, 25% blame Americans traveling internationally, 14% blame mainstream media, 11% blame Joe Biden, which is weird, 9% blame the CDC, and 6.8% blame national public health officials. Now, that's among the vaccinated. Among the unvaccinated, only 9%, or let's say 10% of the unvaccinated blame the unvaccinated for the issue and for the COVID disaster or crisis. Think about that. 9%, basically 10% of them blame themselves for it. I love that. You have 11% that blames Donald Trump. 11% compared to 35%. You have 7.5% blame conservative media compared to 33% of the vaccinated. You have 36.9% that blame foreign travelers to the United States compared to 29% of the vaccinated. I love these numbers. These numbers are fascinating to me. You have Americans traveling internationally. 22.7% are blamed from the standpoint of the unvaccinated, and the vaccinated blames 22.7% of the unvaccinated blames foreign travelers. And then you get Americans traveling internationally, where they blame 22% compared to 25% of the unvaccinated or the vaccinated. And mainstream media, and this is where you start getting these huge breaks. So the breaks were there before, but this is where it gets real weird. So 21% of the unvaccinated blames mainstream media in comparison to 14.6% of the vaccinated. What you will notice here is that people who are vaccinated, to the tune of 78%, blame the vaccinated. People who are unvaccinated don't blame themselves. Even when you get into who blames Donald Trump, 35% of the vaccinated blame Donald Trump compared to only 11% of the unvaccinated. That's because many of the people who are unvaccinated basically back Trump. I mean, if you're looking at one of the polling stats or polling numbers, it's just, I'm fascinated by this in regards to who does America blame. This gets to this pressure that people say they feel, where they feel like that the country or the people who are vaccinated are looking at them a particular way or is blaming them. And yeah, based on the polling, I guess that is somewhat true. That is somewhat true. And I think I've said as much myself. As Dr. Kogan made the point, there was always going to be some level of a breakthrough. There was always breakthroughs expected. And the idea that we were going to hit 70 or 80% vaccinations, fanciful. But by the same token, he also kind of made the point that from the first line of defense, well, second line of defense, that at the very least brings down the number of deaths and everything else. It was a way of going to do it, or a way of doing it. One of the other points I want to make, go back to, is the vaccination and indoor dining. Now, I know people hate this idea of a COVID passport. And I'm wondering if the people that hate the idea of a COVID passport are only people who are basically unvaccinated. It's not that it's a great solution. It's just that you have a situation now where people are concerned that a virus can break through a vaccine that they received. If a person is bulletproof, then it doesn't matter. Meaning, if I'm bulletproof, it doesn't matter if we're in together. We can eat together all we want. You're taking the risk in your own hands at that point. And yes, you're spreading the risk to other people and everything else. But basically, you're taking the risk in your own hand from the standpoint of a restaurant. When you don't know that to be entirely true, then you have an issue and you have a problem. And so, yes, I have no issue with the COVID passport from the standpoint of what Cuomo is bringing into play. It's not that it's a great solution. Not Cuomo, I'm sorry, de Blasio. It's not that it's a great solution. It's just that the other solutions seem to be somewhat worse. Seems to be somewhat worse. In fact, Andre, let's pull that clip, because I want de Blasio to basically make the point himself about what he's going to use for basically the dining pass. Look, I get it. People hate it. People hate it. And thank you. Yeah, let's play the clip for de Blasio. Let's let him make his own case.
The key to NYC Pass will be a first-in-the-nation approach. It will require vaccination for workers and customers in indoor dining, in indoor fitness facilities, indoor entertainment facilities. This is going to be a requirement. The only way to patronize these establishments indoors will be if you're vaccinated, at least one dose. The same for folks in terms of work. They'll need at least one dose. This is crucial because we know that this will encourage a lot more vaccination. We've seen it already.
Mr. de Blasio has been moving, this is the New York Times, aggressively to get more New Yorkers vaccinated to curtail the third wave of coronavirus cases amid concern about the spread of Delta variant. He's requiring city workers to get vaccinated or face weekly testing, and he has offered $100 incentives to the public. Yeah. If you want to participate in our society fully, you've got to get vaccinated. He said at the news conference, it's time. The thing is, and Shane kind of made this point yesterday, it's one shot. And Shane's thing was, why the theater? Why the theater? But I guess, is it theater? I mean, if you're incentivizing people to get vaccinated, even with one dose, would that be a way of doing it? Yeah, I suspect it would be. I mean, having the jobs and everything else. I mean, we've seen a spike in the number of people who've gotten vaccinated. This is something that Joe Biden was talking about prior, where the number of people who got vaccinated over the course of the last few weeks basically spiked. I suspect part of that is public pressure. I suspect part of that is companies basically mandating, saying, in order to work here, you're going to have a vaccine or these kind of round testing. And same thing from the standpoint of Biden with the pressure of basically saying, yeah, if you're going to work with the federal government, you got to get a shot. This case, though, is one shot. Is one shot enough? And does one shot incentivize somebody to get the second shot to get fully vaccinated? I don't know, but we're going to find out based upon what happens going forward in New York. If this works in New York, what you're probably going to see is other cities, especially Democratic cities, start following suit. New York is going to be basically a sandbox, a test case, and we'll see what happens. The problem that de Blasio has, or that he has to kind of skate between, is business interests versus medical interests. Meaning you need to stop the spread. The last thing you want is for this stuff to go wildfire in New York like it did once before. Because if you remember, New York was an epicenter for this for the longest time. So if you're saying, all right, we cannot allow this to take hold in the way that it did once before in New York. Okay, fair enough. And you think, okay, how are we going to do this? Okay, fair enough. Well, they are taking an aggressive stance for this, de Blasio is. And if other cities, or you have a situation where this works in New York, where it's lowered, where the vaccination rates go up in order to kind of balance it out, Yeah, you probably will start seeing it in other cities. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, or typically joined with Shane. He's not feeling well today, but we're coming out of Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. And we're going to have a conversation about New York, where Letitia James basically came out and made the point of releasing a report saying that Cuomo sexually either assaulted or harassed 11 women. And some of the stories in that report were rather damning. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Walter Bragman. Walter Bragman is a journalist with the Daily Poster. Walter, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you coming on. I've been following your reporting on the gerrymandering issue, which we're going to get to later, but I definitely want to get to what's been taking place in New York. So thank you for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Walker, right. Okay, so Walker, let's get on to first and foremost, Nina Turner's loss. Yes, we're going to talk about New York, but I thought you may have a take on her losing in the Ohio seat. What is your take on that? I mean, what is your framing of this, especially from the standpoint of the left and, you know, our framing of politics about policy being paramount and everything else? And if you give people just kind of lefty candidate that the people will lump onto it, she loses to Shontel Brown. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it was a pretty disheartening loss for a lot of people on the left, but it was, I think, one of many to come. I think the political left is going to lose more than it wins. I mean, the odds are definitely stacked against progressive candidates. You have a system where people can spend unlimited sums of money on politics, and that a lot of that money is unaccountable. A lot of that money can come from foreign countries. That's not in this race, but it's a very murky system of campaign finance that we have that could use reform very urgently. And that's one obstacle. Another obstacle is that I think people generally are somewhat skeptical of progress.
Yeah.
This was a solid blue district. It was a district that Hillary Clinton won and then Joe Biden won. So it was not a
Democrats aren't going to lose it either way.
It wasn't necessarily primed for Nina Turner. That said, the polling looked good, so I think a lot of progressives were very excited about this race. But I really do think that the progressive left is going to lose a lot more battles than it wins until it doesn't.
Yeah.
And there will be a point when it doesn't.
I like that.
It's disheartening. But look, you have to have sort of a stomach for politics, I guess. At a certain point, you have to be willing to say, okay, we're going to lose, and we're going to lose again, and we're going to lose again. But you know what? This is the right fight to be having, because ultimately, the only instrument that we have really against climate change, the only instrument that can really do something about it is our federal government.
Yes.
And one way or another, we cannot surrender that to the people that we would be surrendering it to if we disengage.
I appreciate that, Walker. I like that. I definitely like that. And yeah, I agree with you. It's a disheartening loss. I thought she had a pretty good chance. And, it was a solid beating when you look at it. Like, it wasn't even like, a 0.1 difference. It was a significant difference. So I am definitely interested in seeing kind of the tea leaves on that after the rundown goes through, and you can get to see how people voted and why. But let's get to New York for the moment. The big news, of course, is Attorney General Letitia James comes out with a report on sexual abuse that basically puts a knife in Andrew Cuomo. And we have this clip of her. Let's play the clip.
The independent investigation has concluded that Governor Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed multiple women, and in doing so violated federal and state law. Specifically, the investigation found that Governor Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed current and former New York State employees by engaging in unwelcome and non-consensual touching and making numerous offensive comments of a suggestive and sexual nature that created a hostile work environment for women. The investigators independently corroborated and substantiated these facts through interviews and evidence, including contemporaneous notes and communications. This evidence will be made available to the public along with the report.
That is brutal. I mean, even like, if you're going to start off saying the independent investigation, there was no political ties to this. Independent, separate from all of it. And we've concluded that he is guilty. We've concluded that he is guilty. We have cross-corroborating evidence. We've talked to this person, that person. All of these people are saying he did it. And some of the stuff, like the groping, was rough, like to listen to. And even going so far as to say he broke federal and state law. He broke the law. What is going on in New York now after this report came out?
Well, I don't know how Cuomo survives this politically, honestly. I really don't. I mean, New York is a machine, it's a solid blue state, and Cuomo was the head of that machine. Really, she just possibly took down one of the most powerful political machines in the country.
I thought the same thing.
And this is somebody who remember, I guess, and this goes back to the last conversation we were just having about progressives. This is somebody, James ran. Progressives were skeptical when she ran. Because remember that she beat out Zephyr Teachout for this role. So people accused her of being too close to the governor.
Not now.
And
not now.
Yeah, and not now.
Not now.
Yeah, it's like, look, in politics, you never know who's gonna surprise you.
That is a knife.
But this is devastating. The Speaker of the House and the president have both called for him to resign.
Every corner has basically said he needs to resign.
Friends left. He's like one of those polar bears that are, on the ice, the shrinking ice.
I haven't heard anybody come out and back him on this. Like after because it's a damning report. Like there's a few things on this. He had to cede ground first, meaning he was so weakened politically that he couldn't stop this investigation. He had to give this off to somebody who at the very least seemed impartial in regards to the way it operated. He had to. He didn't have a choice. So the report comes out, and it is damning. It is damning. And it's like, how do you survive politically through this? And I don't think you do. I mean, you've had, Pelosi, you've had Biden, you've had pretty much the people who are in New York itself screaming for him to resign. You've had, a criminal investigation potentially opened to see whether or not he violated rights. I mean, this is insane politically.
Oh, it's absolutely crazy. And if it weren't such a machine state, it would already be done.
Be over with.
He'd already be gone.
I have another clip,
but because he is the head of this machine.
Yeah, he still is limping along. Let's hear Latita James. She's asked on whether or not Cuomo should resign. Let's play the clip.
Do you think the governor, given the devastating nature of this report, and I get what you're saying about it's up to local prosecutors if they want to move forward on this, but do you think that this would all be wrapped up well if you would resign, leave?
That decision ultimately is up to the governor of the state of New York. The report speaks for itself. And right now I think we should all be focused on the courageous and bravery of the women who came forward. And all of us should be focused on keeping women safe, believing women, and allowing women to speak their truth. And that's exactly what this document does.
Allowing women to speak their truth. I love this. I love her. I don't know what it is. All of a sudden, I love her in this moment. Because there's something about, should the governor resign? Hey, look, I can't tell what the governor should do. I don't know what the governor should do. I'm just saying that this is the document. I've allowed women to speak their truth. We should believe women, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That, man, I love it. That is amazing. Like, is this the new governor of New York?
I mean, it's a powerful moment for Letitia James.
Yes.
It is a very powerful moment. And frankly, it's I have to say it's a powerful moment that we're seeing for women of color just in politics generally. I mean, Letitia James brings down Governor Cuomo. Cori Bush moves the entire political conversation in Washington, on the eviction moratorium. I mean, this is a crazy time we're living in, and I think it's a time that people that for too long. Sorry,
You're fine.
Sorry about that. It's my phone. But it's a time for people who would have been marginalized voices are coming out and they're speaking out. And I mean, politics does change in America. It really does. And sometimes it changes for the better. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Who else, if not Cuomo? I mean, you made the point of saying that New York is a machine. Okay, if it's a machine, who else? Who's in the wings? I mean, assuming for the moment that Cuomo does not run for a third term, and that's assuming he makes it through this term after that. I mean, that was brutal. That's a brutal takedown. I don't want to speculate too much. Because, I mean, look, if Cuomo goes down, people tied to him or the political calculus in New York changes, right? Yeah.
Like, this was the most powerful guy in the state. He had ties to everybody. And pretty much people built their careers around him.
But he also made enemies.
I think. I mean,
just in the way that Cuomo operated.
Yes, he did. I think people like, at least for the left, I think people like Zephyr Teachout and Cynthia Nixon become very, very sympathetic characters. Not that they weren't already, but like
considering why Cuomo was taken down, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Who you could have had instead, I think they have a very strong case to make.
And just so we're clear,
should they decide to?
This is not even the only investigation that is over Cuomo's head. I mean, we haven't even gotten to the dead grandma stuff. I mean, the hiding grandmas in the nursing home and cutting the numbers. I'm saying grandmas, but you get my point. The elderly people that were in the nursing homes that Cuomo cut the numbers. Like, there's still investigations going on for that.
Right, and that's sort of the unspoken thing that's going on right now is that I don't think Cuomo was alone in making the calculus of people are dying and it's going to be it's going to be vulnerable demographics and they're not really priority demographics for us. I think that's a calculus that's been happening all over the country.
There may be a calculus that's happening all over the country, but Cuomo was the one that got caught with it. And he was cutting them by half.
He is the one that got caught with it. Although he's been a little overshadowed by Ron DeSantis down in Florida now.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Who's basically like, yeah, we're not going to do anything. Look, I think He definitely look. I think Cuomo deserves all the accountability Cuomo can get, but I think that this particular issue speaks to a much larger issue with our society that that goes right up to the national level. That we have been balancing public health with economics, and that balance that is not a balance to be struck in the middle of a public health emergency. You can't say we have to, we can't do the best path for public health because it would be disruptive to the economy. You have to take emergency measures. You have to get the virus under control. You have to do it quickly too, because this thing is mutating.
Yeah,
mutating
but that's
very quickly.
I mean, but that's in balance. I mean, there's always imbalance between public health versus economic health. Meaning there's never going to be this thing where you put it just your foot down on one side of this. It's always a balance. It's an interplay.
Oh, of course. Right. But I think that our public health policy should be guided by our most protective impulses when you have a virus that has killed, up to 900,000 Americans.
No, I agree. No, I do agree. But
I think that,
But you get to a point when you have 5,000 people dropping dead. Yes, 1,000% agree. When you have a situation where you're trying to get it under control and you're trying to kind of reopen and there's that interplay, well, you're always going to get this kind of weird juxtaposition between one position to the other that is not necessarily going to be the most, gently done. And like, for example, in the case that we have now, you could say that what should they have done different from your perspective? Meaning, do you think they should have tried to open up the economy? Do you think they should have gotten rid of the mask mandates, those type of things?
No, I think that with the Delta variant, we should have adopted, and probably long before the Delta variant, when this virus first hit, I think we should have adopted an elimination strategy, similar to New Zealand. I think we should have paid people to stay home, and I think that we should have implemented very strict worker protections through the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which has not, those emergency protections have not manifested for all workplaces. In fact, they're limited to just healthcare workers. So I think that there are a number of things that we could have done differently. And as you said, as you're trying to open up, you have to balance that is true. But I think the decision to open up has been premature throughout this process, and especially here in New York. I mean, you have Governor Cuomo pushing to reopen, get everybody back into office buildings, because remote work has become such a big thing. Yeah. You have Cuomo pushing to get people back into office buildings by Labor Day.
Because he's worried that what does it matter to him that people are working from home if they can work from home? I'm trying to understand, like, what's the issue? That seems to be a private business stuff. That's what it is. So he needs people down to go to those restaurants at lunchtime to eat those donuts or those hot dogs at the stands. He wants the city to be packed with people.
He wants people back in commercial buildings because because he has a lot of commercial real estate donors. That would be my take on it.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, look. Commercial real estate has taken a hit because the new economy. You can work from home. You can do you can do your job sort of anywhere these days if you have the right kind of job. I mean,
no, I get it. I guess and I agree. I totally agree. I guess I'm getting at, it seems like a private enterprise thing. I mean, how's the governor pushing people or companies to bring people back if those people don't need to work, come back? Does that make sense? I'm trying to understand how.
That's a whole other question. But look, I think to some extent, Cuomo is the type of leader that, or the type of leader who sort of acts, who doesn't really worry about it too much. Like Biden has been much more hands off during this pandemic. Cuomo wants to keep his ship sort of as he wants it.
And that's been on some level kind of the problem. I mean, that's. I mean,
it absolutely has. When you have a lot of power, it definitely leaves a lot of room
consequences.
For abuse.
Let's play Biden's clip, because Biden is asked about this at a press conference yesterday when he's bringing up COVID and he's trying to tell people, look, get vaccinated, et cetera. It's his push for it. Let's play Biden.
I'd like to start with the news of the day, given back in March you said that if the investigation confirmed the allegations against Governor Cuomo, then he should resign. So will you now call on him to resign, given the investigators said the 11 women were credible?
I stand by that statement.
Are you now calling on him to resign?
Yes.
And if he doesn't resign, do you believe he should be impeached and removed from office?
Let's take one thing at a time here. I think he should resign. I understand that the state legislature may decide to impeach. I don't know that for a fact. I've not read all that data.
And he's using a photo of you embracing him in his self-defense to say that these are commonplace kind of embraces that he made and the allegations against him. Do you condone that?
Look, I'm not going to fly-spec this. I'm sure there are some embraces that were totally innocent. But apparently the Attorney General decided there were things that weren't.
All right, so that's Biden's claim that basically, yeah, he should resign. And Cuomo, what Biden is talking about there, Cuomo had a defense. And he made the point of like, look, I hugged all sorts of people. This is me. And he gave all of these images. Let's play the clip. We have the clip. Let's play this clip.
Over the past several months, you have heard a number of complaints brought against me. I called for an independent review, and I said at the beginning I would let the process unfold. I didn't want anyone to say that I interfered. I said I would hold my tongue, and I have, making only limited comments. It has been a hard and a painful period for me and my family, especially as others feed ugly stories to the press. But I cooperated with the review, and I can now finally share the truth. My attorney, who is a non-political former federal prosecutor, has done a response to each allegation, and the facts are much different than what has been portrayed. That document is available on my website. If you are interested, please take the time to read the facts and decide for yourself. First, I want you to know directly from me that I never touched anyone inappropriately or made inappropriate sexual advances. I am 63 years old. I've lived my entire adult life in public view. That is just not who I am, and that's not who I have ever been.
Well, I mean, it seems like you were, buddy. I mean, even going to the point of attacking a person after they came out with their claims. What?
Right.
So
it's pretty staggering.
Yeah.
His response is pretty staggering.
And the pictures showing pictures of him hugging and kissing people. It's weird.
Right. Like that doesn't change anything.
No.
This is this was an investigation, and it was an independent investigation, and it reached its conclusions. And like I don't know. And again, this is somebody who's had a lot of power for a long time. And
I could be wrong, but I would be stunned if he could survive this. Let alone
I would too
in another election. Walker, I want to move on to a different thing, the gerrymandering issue, because this was the thing that I originally brought you on for. I was, Joe Biden, when he had the conversation about, or when he gave a speech about the voting issue, he acted as if this is an existential issue. And on some level, I agree with him. It is. Making it difficult for people to vote, well, that's a democracy issue. That's a representative government issue. Like, that's something that's literal to just the in the bricks of the system itself for the system to work. These guys are planning a get out to vote campaign as opposed to doing something about it from a government standpoint. You have all of these states in the South that are passing laws that are going to make it difficult for people to vote. Well, Republicans are not going to make it difficult for their people to vote. They're going to make it difficult for the other side to vote. And so you have Democrats in Congress that have the power to do something about it and are not. They have a deadline on this. And I think they have 14 days before the gerrymandering and everything else comes into play. Now, explain what is occurring and explain why Democrats have a deadline, meaning federal Democrats have a deadline from the standpoint of their actions.
So, okay, so on August 16th, it's 12 days now.
No,
the Census Bureau, the U.S. Census Bureau, is going to release census data to the states, and that will allow them to begin redrawing their congressional and state legislative districts. I believe in 31 states, state legislatures draw the districts for Congress, and in 30 states, they draw the districts for state legislatures. But ultimately, 37 states have a process where elected officials decide the shape of congressional maps. And 20 of those are fully Republican controlled, and only 8 are held by Democrats, and there's 9 of them are split. So this redistricting process basically is you draw the shape of a map, the state legislative maps and the congressional maps, and that process will be over for most of the country in a matter of weeks. And gerrymandering is when you use that process to favor one political party over another. And we've already seen that the Republicans are willing to use this process to their political advantage. I mean, look, both parties have done it, but in 2010, after the 2010 midterms, when Republicans implemented a strategy known as the Redistricting Majority Project, or Red Map, where they poured money into the state races to control the process, Republicans gained a palpable advantage for the next decade. I mean, Michael Lee of the Brennan Center for Justice has a great piece right now in the Washington Post where he points out that in 2011, Republicans in Pennsylvania passed a congressional map that divided communities to give the Republicans a lock on 13 of the state's 18 congressional districts. In 2012, Democrats won 51% of the congressional vote statewide, but got only 5 seats in Congress.
I think people need to realize that, how weird and how warped that is. I mean, it's almost like instead of having a district that looks, let's say, like a little circle of sorts, you know, where you have an even distribution of various people, meaning you're not trying to game the district. You're just saying, all right, what does the district look like? And okay, here's my district. Well, when they get to draw it, they can draw it into these weird shapes, like, you know, these spindly lines, or, you know, where you can carve out people who will be much more likely to vote for you and leave out people who won't. That way you can basically lock your people and your side into the seat. And that's what they've been, and that's the issue. And it's like, unless you're going to do something on a federal level, you're going to be stuck with the results on the various state levels after redistricting.
Exactly. So in Pennsylvania, like to win 6 seats, Democrats would have had to reach 56% of the congressional vote, which is unheard of. It would be a historic high. So like that's how bad it was back then. Now,
and this was under Obama, right? When Obama took office,
this is what doomed Obama's agenda, or what agenda he did have. The Brennan Center found that the Republican gerrymandering gave them an extra 15 to 17 seats in Congress. So that was then. It's going to be worse this time because the Supreme Court sort of cleared the way for it. There are 2 decisions. One of them was the Shelby County decision that struck down the formula for federal preclearance to changes in election laws, and in jurisdictions with a history
These are the voting rights laws that the Supreme Court basically ripped limb to limb.
Yeah, so it gutted there's no preclearance now because there's no formula for applying it under the Voting Rights Act, meaning states and jurisdictions, I should say, that that have histories of racial segregation, they don't have to pre-clear the changes to their election laws or maps with the federal government now.
So what power does Biden have to do anything about this at this point? I mean, and that's assuming that they don't pass law, because that's the catch. And that was the whole point of the Texas Texas Democrats and everything else. It was trying to get them to Congress to act. And even though the House has passed, I think it's called For the People, Senate can't be moved to budge.
Right. exactly. The For the People Act is sort of a democracy infrastructure bill. It would address a lot of these issues. Because the second decision that I was going to mention is in 2019 the Supreme Court basically okayed gerrymandering. It said that it's a question for the legislature. So that gave Congress some pretty wide leeway to regulate or ban this practice, right. And that would be what the For the People Act does. Now, that act has stalled, and Democrats in the House, the House, which is controlled by Democrats, is on recess right now. With a 12-day deadline to do this, because if you do it after this deadline, or sometime after, and the process is already completed, it's going to be you're going to have lawsuits.
It's that much harder to pull off after you have to undo it, because you're basically unraveling stuff at that point.
It's easier to prevent than to undo.
Yeah. What powers does Biden have to do anything about this absent Congress? And I guess this is going to have to be the last question. I mean, if Congress doesn't do what they're going to do, and it doesn't seem like they are, like you say, they're on recess, what power does the president have at all to do anything by himself?
By himself, nothing. This is a question for Congress. This has to be for Congress. But the president has the bully pulpit. He could get out there. He could be making an issue of this instead of saying, you should out organize it, which is what he told a bunch of voting rights activists.
Right,
recently.
get out the vote campaigns.
You're gonna have to out organize. But
basically, we want people to be in lines for 8 hours. You just got to, get them out there.
And they're sort of leaving this up to like a group run by Eric Holder, the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, to fight it out in court. But that's really a terrible strategy, because Republicans can gerrymander control of Congress in 2022 or 2023 when they take office. They can gerrymander control without a single vote changing from 2020 when Democrats won millions more votes nationwide.
That's right.
This is an existential issue for the party, and frankly for the liberal majority in this country, which has been so disempowered already through anti-majoritarian institutions like the Supreme Court, like the U.S. Senate, like the Electoral College. I mean, this would really end, I think, any semblance of majoritarian democracy in the U.S., and they have to do something about it.
They don't seem to be
should
bothered.
Contact their legislators.
Outside of Biden giving a speech, they don't seem to be bothered. So this seems to be something that's going to go.
It's very troubling.
Past. Yes. Walker, thank you. I really appreciate this. Walker Bragman, he's a journalist with the Daily Poster. I follow him on Twitter all the time. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm typically joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you out of our station in Washington, D.C. Shane will be back tomorrow, the day after. He's not feeling all that well. But I want to get to a story that I thought was fascinating since we covered it as it was taking place. A hearing officer from the National Labor Relations Board determined Monday that Amazon violated federal laws by encouraging employees to vote against unionizing at his Bessemer, Alabama warehouse facility and pressuring the United States Postal Service to install a ballot collection box. And this is CBS News reporting. We've covered the story. And when we were covering the story, we were making the point that this seems somewhat dodgy, but we were kind of also making the point that companies often have all sorts of institutional advantages in regards to unionization votes. And here we are to have a conversation about this and to get an explanation on basically a little bit more context. We're joined with John A. Logan. John Logan is a professor and director of labor and employment studies at San Francisco State University and a visiting research associate at the University of California, Berkeley Labor Center. He has published widely on the right to organize, employer opposition to unions in the United States and globally, and has worked on research projects with unions in over 20 countries. Professor Logan, thank you for joining me.
Glad to be on.
So what is taking place here? What happened? How was Amazon allowed to do this? Because I remember when this was taking place, it was pointed out that they were pressuring the United States Postal Service to install the collection box. And so it was like that some of the stuff was known in advance. Why now? And what does this opinion mean, I should ask?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So what happened very briefly during the election was that Amazon had lobbied the National Labor Relations Board very hard to try and get an on-site election. It didn't want a mail-in election. It wanted workers to have to vote at the workplace, but because of the pandemic, then LRB said no way, mail-in box election. Then it asked for a drop box within the facility to allow workers to cast their ballots at work, and then LRB said no. Can't have that. We told you a mail-in election. Then, as you said, it emerged from emails that Amazon had put intense pressure, not just on the Postal Service, but on senior management at the U.S. Postal Service. Obviously, Amazon is the Postal Service's largest customer by a mile, and they had said, this is really important. This must happen, were the words, must happen. And, Amazon's top management is following this. So, for the first time that anyone knows, the Postal Service agreed to put a one-customer temporary mailbox facility for the purpose of the NLRB election. It gets worse than that. Amazon asked, can we put election stickers on the mailbox? Postal Service said, absolutely not, cannot do that. So Amazon proceeded to put a big marquee around the mailbox and plastered the marquee with vote no election stickers.
Wow.
Therefore, recreating the impression of a polling booth. And the workers thought that, Amazon was playing a direct role in setting up the vote. And, some of them even thought that Amazon might have access to the mailbox, that might have access to the ballots. So, in short, the mailbox really sort of poisoned the entire atmosphere around the election. So it wasn't surprising that the mailbox became the sort of centerpiece to the union's complaint after the election, which Amazon won, over 2-1. And as you said, on Monday we got the hearing officer's recommendation that they overturn the election results and have a rerun election. Now we have to wait a few weeks till we get a final decision from the regional director of the NLRB. Prior to that, the parties, both the union and the company, can file exceptions to the hearing officer's report. It's highly unlikely that the regional director will go against what the hearing officer has recommended.
Interesting.
The regional director is likely to also recommend a rerun election. Then Amazon does have the right to request review by the whole National Labor Relations Board in Washington, D.C. But, by the end of August, that will have a Democratic majority. It's unlikely, one never knows with the board, but it's unlikely that they would overturn a recommendation for a rerun election.
Very interesting. I don't think people get the gravity of, how much weight a company has over their employees. It's like they are basically controlling whether or not this person is going to be able to eat, whether they're going to be able to pay their rent. And if you're looking at this country, I think the overwhelming majority of the country, like 60-something% or more, didn't have $500 in the bank, meaning there's not this kind of space for people on the lower end of the economic ladder or in the middle of the economic ladder to be able to take that firing or to take that loss of a job and go forward. If members of the company think that the company knows who is basically putting in their ballots, you can imagine it taints the well. It makes it difficult for individuals to vote. Some of those people who are like, look, yes, all things being equal, I will vote for this union, but no, I don't necessarily want to create any ripples. And I think they know who is voting for who. It taints the vote. It taints the well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. As you said, I mean, all of this has to be understood in the context of the enormous imbalance of power at the workplace. And as you said, even if workers don't believe that they're going to get fired if they vote for the union, most of them don't even want to piss off their supervisor or their manager. I mean, you know, people just want to do their job, get along, you know, get ahead, whatever. And as we've discussed before, and as you pointed out, there are a huge number of things that Amazon can do legally to oppose the union, things that probably should be unlawful, but under current law, they're not. So many things that they can, and they did do at Bessemer. They did hundreds and different of things, you know, some of which were legal, some of which were in the gray area of the law, other things such as the mailbox, which the NLRB has ruled is unlawful. But the problem is that the law doesn't have any real penalties for violating the, you know, rerun election. Okay, but unions tend to fare poorly in rerun elections, but there are no meaningful financial or other penalties imposed. So Amazon has violated the law according to the National Labor Relations Board, not just in Alabama, but yesterday there was a story in Vice about Staten Island. New York Times has written about Virginia. You know, multiple places where workers have tried to form a union. This is a consistent pattern of behavior on the part of the company, and yet it just gets a slap on the wrist. I mean, the penalties are absolutely meaningless when you're talking about an enormous company with the financial and other resources that Amazon has.
Well, what are the penalties for something like this? I mean, if they can continue, say, for example, they continuously violate, you know, some kind of law associated with the creation of the union, is it just continuous rerun elections? I mean, what's the penalties against them?
So typically, I mean, the kind of unlawful activity that Amazon and others have engaged in, you know, tends to be things about, you know, terminating, about firing or discriminating against workers on the basis of their activism or their support to the union. And if they fire someone, all they need to do is reinstate them and give them the back pay minus any pay that they received in the meantime. So if they've gone out and gotten another job, you know, they can deduct that from whatever Amazon has to pay them. Plus, many workers don't want their job back, you know, after they've been fired from an employer for trying to form a union, and they have to post a notice saying they won't do it again. So in this case, you know, you do have like a recommendation for a rerun election. But as I say, you know, after you've had an incredibly, you know, confrontational, stressful, you know, campaign, you know, where Amazon has sort of subjected the workers to hours and hours and hours of anti-union meetings and propaganda, the chances of any union winning a quick second election are very small. And so, you know, unless you actually so-called impose a bargaining order, say to the company, you are required, even although you won the election, you cheated, and therefore you're required to bargain with the union. But there are things that the Biden National Labor Relations Board could and should, I think, now be doing. You know, under Obama, the NLRB started to issue what are called self-consolidated complaints against Walmart because it's said what we're seeing is a consistent pattern of anti-union behavior, multiple instances interfering with workers' rights to form a union all across the country. And so, I mean, you know, the tools available to the NLRB and to other government agencies are fairly weak. But I think, you know, they really need to sort of focus on the enormous problem that Amazon is presenting in terms of undermining workplace rights, because, you know, this isn't going to go away. I mean,
no, it's not. And John, 10, 15 seconds. So what do you think happens here? Yes, they may probably have a rerun, but no, the chances go down after an election has already run from the standpoint of the union vote.
It's very tough, but I mean, the good thing about it is, you know, this keeps the issue in the news. This keeps a focus on Amazon's unlawful behavior, but also just this brutal anti-union behavior. And
John, we're going to have to stop it here, but thank you. I really appreciate this. I'm Professor John Logan. He's Director of Labor and Employment Studies at San Francisco State University, Visiting Research Associate for the University of California, Berkeley Labor Center. You guys are listening to Fault Lines on Thomas Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left and the only corner today, I am your ever vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas, and you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Welcome back to Fault Lines. It's always a little bit weird doing that when you're by yourself because there's typically an interplay between you and the other person. It's like when you're trying to change it to one. It gets a little awkward. So, stick in the landing. I'll take it. But let's get to some of the headlines. And great conversation with Dr. John Logan earlier today. So we've had Walker Bragman to have a conversation. Basically, this was at the 8 o'clock hour. This was on Turner's loss in Ohio. This was on the gerrymandering issue. And of course, this was on Cuomo, all things Cuomo. Very interesting conversation, what's taking place in New York right now. We've also had a conversation this morning with Dr. Mikhail Kogan, and this was on issues of COVID. Dr. Mikhail Kogan, of course, is great with that. He routinely joins us to discuss issues with medical issues in general, but just so happened COVID, the Delta variant of COVID has been high on the marquee for conversation. But coming up, we're going to have Caleb Maupin, and that should be a great conversation on Iran, but also issues pertaining to New York. But that said, let's get to the headlines. In the news, about 149,788 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, and there were about 668 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 92,005 cases per day, an increase of 139% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 50% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 58% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 35,325,243 people across the United States and has killed 614,104 unfortunate men, women, and children across the United States. And we need to make a note that we haven't seen this high single-day caseload since the first day of February, near the peak of the winter sickness season. Meaning we're seeing this in the summertime. As Dr. Mikhail Kogan made the point, that we're not seeing this in kind of like in the wintertime you get a cold or the flu, etc. We're seeing this basically all year round. It doesn't necessarily keep any kind of pattern in regards to the season. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has stated that the state will not go into another lockdown. This comes after Florida broke their own COVID case record on Friday, hitting 21,683 new infections for the day. And in July, the state accounted for 40% of the country's total infections. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has been found to have sexually harassed women by the investigators appointed by New York Governor Attorney General Letitia James, reportedly violating state and federal law. This follows a publicized interview between the two investigators and Cuomo just the day before, in which Cuomo suggested that the pair had an axe to grind. President Biden has called for Cuomo's resignation as governor. Andre, let's pull up the clip for Cuomo. I'll come back to it in a moment, but this is from Letitia James when she is basically giving her announcement. I'll come back to it. In New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio has announced the start of a city program called Key to New York City Pass. As a pressure to get people vaccinated, the program will require proof of vaccination for both workers and customers at indoor businesses, including restaurants, gyms, and entertainment venues, and performances such as movies, concerts, and Broadway. The CDC has identified a legal authority for a new and different moratorium that would be for areas with high and substantial increases in COVID-19 infections. The Biden administration is set to announce the new 60-day program today that will protect areas where 90% of Americans live. We should come back to that because that one is somewhat of a big deal that's taking place today. Former President Barack Obama has reportedly scaled back his 60th birthday party due to rising Delta variant case count after receiving pushback for the scale and intensity of the party compared to rumblings of a return to lockdowns, mandated masks, and even vaccines as a worsening of the COVID situation overall. The party, which would have been held on Martha's Vineyard with an attendance of approximately 700, including staff, has been reduced to include only family and close friends. Yesterday, Human Rights Watch released a report criticizing some Lebanese government officials, saying that they, quote, tactically accepted the risk, unquote, of storing ammonium nitrate in the portside warehouse that set fire, then exploded last year, catastrophically damaging the city's port and much of the surrounding infrastructure and killing hundreds. Lebanon's caretaker government called the report faulty and said that it, quote, deviates from the truth, unquote. Firefighters in Greece raced to contain a fire that forced the evacuation of thousands near Athens. Temperatures in parts of the country are as high as 45 degrees Celsius or 113 degrees Fahrenheit. The fire is burning on the outskirts of Athens, though nearby forests, through the nearby forests, and has destroyed dozens of homes. So far, medal leaders in the Olympics, in order, are the United States, China, and Russian athletes, Great Britain, and Japan. China has the most gold medals with 32. The United States follows at 25, and Japan follows the U.S. with 21. Kristina Simenovskaya, the Belarusian sprinter who refused to fly home, left Japan this morning and boarded a flight to Vienna after spending a night in a secure hotel under Japanese police protection. She will be transported to Poland after she lands, where she has been granted a visa. U.S. women's basketball team won the 53rd game in a row after blowing out Australia 79-55 behind Breanna Stewart's 23 points. Next up, they'll face Serbia in the semifinals on Friday. And last, U.S. hurdler Sydney McLaughlin set a world record on her way to winning the gold medal in the 400-meter hurdle as she finished in the race 51.46 seconds. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So let's bring up a clip for New York Cuomo, Letitia James, because I want you to, because I want you guys to hear this press conference. This conference, it's one thing to say that Letitia James, Attorney General for New York, put a knife in Cuomo. It's another thing to hear it. It's a damning statement. She has presence. She has authority. And as she is saying this, again, independent, supposedly, and it probably is, this looks bad. And as we had the conversation with Walker, I have a hard time seeing how Cuomo limps away with this. And Cuomo's defense for this has not necessarily been all that good. I mean, after all, Cuomo, in responding to all of these corners for people telling him to resign, put out a video of him basically hugging people. And he's hugging all sorts of people, black, white, men, women, etc. And his defense and point is, hey, I get cuddly sometimes. I'm a creep to everybody. I'm not creepy just to these various women when I'm screaming, kiss me on the lips and everything else. Look, I'm hugging all of these people, which on some level looks like it undermines the report. It undermines what the people are saying. And some of those cases go beyond hugging. Some of the cases that were reported went into straight groping. Let's play the clip of Letitia James giving the press conference.
Do you think the governor, given the devastating nature of this report, and I get what you're saying about it's up to local prosecutors if they want to move forward on this, but do you think that this would all be wrapped up well if you would resign, leave?
That decision ultimately is up to the governor of the state of New York. The report speaks for itself. And right now I think we should all be focused on the courageous and bravery of the women who came forward. And all of us should be focused on keeping women safe, believing women, and allowing women to speak their truth. And that's exactly what this document does.
Now, she's talking about the report, and notice the presence and the way she's putting it. Look, Letitia James looks great here. Let's hear her basically present the report in and of itself and the findings of the report. Let's play this clip.
The independent investigation has concluded that Governor Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed multiple women, and in doing so violated federal and state law. Specifically, the investigation found that Governor Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed current and former New York State employees by engaging in unwelcome and non-consensual touching and making numerous offensive comments of a suggestive and sexual nature that created a hostile work environment for women. The investigators independently corroborated and substantiated these facts through interviews and evidence, including contemporaneous notes and communications. This evidence will be made available to the public along with the report.
Yeah, presence. That sounds bad. That sounds extremely bad. How do you walk away from something like this, even if you're somebody like Andrew Cuomo that is a head of a powerful machine in New York? The report also includes this. 2 of Governor Andrew Cuomo's top lieutenants, and this is the Washington Free Beacon, top lieutenants recruited the president of the Human Rights Campaign to obtain a confidential personnel file on one of the governor's accusers, which they leaked to multiple media outlets. According to the bombshell report released by the New York Attorney General Letitia James on Tuesday, Richard Azipodardi and Melissa DeRosa directed the release of information about Cuomo's accuser, Lindsey Boland, after she publicly accused the governor of sexual harassment in December in 2020. And I mean, when you think about it, all of this looks bad. And all of this stuff came out for Cuomo. Cuomo is refusing to resign, so there's that. And like I said, he came out and gave his statement basically pushing back on what the accusers are saying. But this looks bad. This looks very bad. And Cuomo may have all sorts of political acumen, and he's going to need it if he's going to walk away from this. Some of the other question, there's other deeper questions in this too. Some of the reports talk about how there was a feeling of Cuomo top executives, meaning people who are close to Cuomo, and the way that they related to one another. And because they related to one another in a particular way, it made them uncomfortable. So what if you have an office culture that you've developed with people who you're very close to? And let's say it's sexist in a certain way or misogynistic in a way that certain people would see it. But the people who are there think it's perfectly fine. And these people have been with him for a very, very long time. Anybody who's coming into that is going to feel some kind of way. And whether they should or shouldn't feel some kind of way is secondary to the fact that they're going to feel some kind of way. Some of this feels like that in the way that when you're reading through multiple reports about this, where it did come across as if he had certain close ties with various people in the office and engaged with those people in a particular way. The problem for Cuomo is that it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that. That's the problem for Cuomo. And some of this stuff is not just, oh, I said something to the person. It's not just, I said something to this person and I was joking and they thought I wasn't joking. Some of this stuff goes into physical contact. And the part that goes into physical contact, I suspect that's the part where it gets into criminal investigation and whether or not Cuomo, this gets into legal issues. But that being said, the report coming out of New York is mind-blowing. And Letitia James standing here in this kind of historic moment where Cuomo, who's been in that office for, 3 terms at this point, trying to beat his dad for a 4th. And after being this kind of fixture in New York for all of these years, bully, understood to be so, aggressive, understood to be so, and in this very specific case, woman harasser, sexual harasser, and potentially sexual abuser. And according to this report, disgraced. What happens to Cuomo here? And more interestingly, what happens to New York after Cuomo? That is going to be anybody's guess. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined typically with my co-host Shane Stranahan. He's not feeling well today. We're coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I'm just going to bring our guest on because our guest is phenomenal, and I enjoy talking with him. And there are two issues that we want to talk about. The Iranian tanker, or Iran being accused of basically hijacking a tanker, or Iranian-backed militias accused of taking a tanker. But I also want to get into the conversation about what is taking place in New York. So I'm just going to invite him on, Caleb Maupin. He's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise in prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. Caleb, thank you for joining me.
Sure, glad to be here.
Absolutely. So let's start with the Iranian tanker. So Reuters, Iran-backed forces seize tanker. Maritime sources say Iran denies it. Then you have Israel coming out, Bennett, basically saying that Israel is able to act against Iran over the ship attack. And I'll just read it. Israel is rallying global action against Iran over an attack on an Israeli-managed tanker off Oman last week, but is capable of responding on its own if necessary, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said on Tuesday. The United States and Britain and Israel blamed Iran for the suspected drone strike on Thursday, in which 2 crew members, a Briton and a Romanian, were killed. Tehran denies involvement. Caleb, frame this for us. What is going on?
There have been a series of provocations like this. For years, we've been hearing all kinds of allegations. There's been situations where the USA is seizing Iranian oil tankers, where South Korea is seizing Iranian oil tankers. We then have situations where, the Houthi rebels in Yemen that are alleged to be backed by Iran are accused of attacking Saudi Arabian oil tankers. And it's all very shady. There's just a lot of questions about all of these incidents, especially with the drone. You don't know who is directing that drone. You don't know where that came from. And this is just one of many, many incidents that happen. And it seems like as soon as they happen, there are certain forces that want to jump up and say, yes, let's go to war with Iran. Let's attack Iran. Let's have more sanctions on Iran. And then there seem to be a lot of cooler heads in the international community and in government bodies that say, okay, this happened. Let's get to the bottom of it. And then the incident goes out of the news cycle and we don't hear anything more about it. It's very, very mysterious, I must say. But it also has a very big impact on the oil price, mind you. Every time there's one of these instances, the oil price goes up. That every time that the oil apparatus of the Middle East becomes the subject of international intrigue and military attacks and such, the oil price goes up. And so I look at this and I say, we'll find out eventually what's going on. And there's a number of incidents that we're still waiting to find out what actually happened. And we'll wait to see what happens. I mean, at this point, I'm not jumping on the bandwagon to go to war. And I think most of the human race thinks that a war between Israel and Iran, which would probably escalate to a war between the United States and the war between Russia and China, could spark off some kind of dangerous global situation. I think the whole world is saying that would not be a good situation. So let's find out what actually happened. Let's see if we can investigate and figure out where this drone came from. Obviously, if people were killed, that's a tragedy, and one's heart goes out to their families, so some oil workers lost their lives. That's a horrific thing. But rather than escalate this to a war where more people lose their lives, why don't we investigate what actually happened? and figure out what's going on. And, let's keep in mind that, Biden has said he's open to bringing back the Iran nuclear deal. He said that. And so, yet Israel is saying that they are determined to prevent that from happening.
Right there. And that's where I was going to go with this. Is there something to be said for that? Like where Biden is trying to, let's say, put some kind of pressure, or where something is, because I couldn't necessarily tell whether it's, like you said, it's a drone. It's a drone. It can be controlled by anybody. That's not, like, it's hard to basically appropriate blame one way or the other, but because it's difficult to appropriate blame, I have no idea where it came from. And I suspect that's the issue. And does that have any bearing itself on the deal? Because Biden definitely wants the deal. I don't necessarily see where Biden goes outside of that deal. You tell me, is there somewhere else that the U.S. goes outside of the nuclear deal?
There you go. It looks to me like there is a difference between Israel and the United States over the Iran nuclear deal. And this is a situation that puts pressure on the United States to not, do that and not get back into the deal. This kind of strengthens Israel's argument that Iran is more dangerous, but we don't know that Iran did this. We're still waiting for the facts. And again, this is, look over the last 2 or 3 years, how many weird incidents like this where some oil production apparatus has been attacked or some oil tanker has been seized. Look into the details of these cases, and you'll realize there's a number of cases where we're still waiting to find out what actually happened. And of course, in a number of these cases, the same forces that want to kill the Iran nuclear deal immediately jumped up and said, Iran did it, and we need to escalate with Iran. And then everyone else said, let's look into the facts. And then all of a sudden, it was out of the news cycle, and everyone forgot about it. And I find that to be very, very shady, the fact that these kind of incidents keep happening, and the fact that oil production and oil, tankers and oil transportation and the oil industry seems to be a big center of it. And that must be said. Like, the fact that the Middle East is a big center of global conflict has a lot to do with the fact that we have an oil-based economy. Our economy globally is centered around oil. If you get on an airplane, that's oil. You drive a car, that's oil. Anything plastic in your home, that's oil, right? Oil is what makes our global economy run right now. And the oil markets are dominated by the 4 super major corporations based in the United States and Britain: ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. If you throw in France's total into that, we're talking about 80% of the global oil production. Yeah. Oil is how Wall Street and London dominate the world, as they run the oil industry. And you have countries like Iran, you have countries like Venezuela, you have countries like Russia that are also in the oil business, but they are competitors with those big, 4 super majors. They're competitors with the dominant forces in the market, which are based in the United States and Britain. And so oil is very, very important, and the Middle East is where a lot of the world's oil is. And so, interestingly, the Middle East is the center of all kinds of conflict globally.
So you think the intrigue that's taking place with this is directly associated with the fact that basically oil is the major commerce across the world. And so all of the competition seems to be taken and centered in this area. It's not I think you're making the point that it's not a coincidence.
Yes. If you want to control the global economy, you got to control the oil. And, Saudi Arabia is in with the Western countries and in with ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. But Iran, on the other hand, they had the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Their oil is under the hands of a government, the Islamic Republic, that comes out of a revolution, has a network of Basij councils and neighborhoods. The biggest economic entity in Iran is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is a military force accountable only to Iran's supreme leader that's above the elected government. And Iran is a section of the international oil markets that is independent and exporting in competition with these Western oil companies. And if you look at the history of the Middle East, you can talk about the rise of the Ba'ath movement, in Iraq, and Saddam Hussein. He was an independent leader that was exporting on the international markets in competition. You can talk about the rise of Gaddafi and how, Gaddafi was very much a competitor on the international oil markets and was using the oil resources to make Libya a very prosperous country. And the fact that the Middle East is where there's so much oil, and, the fact that there's so much conflict there is not a coincidence. It's because our world runs on oil.
It does seem, though, that Biden, there's a juxtaposition between this notion of, okay, the conflict in that particular region versus the political things that they want to get accomplished. And I agree with you that from the standpoint of, okay, who profits or who benefits? in the situation of chaos, well, yeah, like you said, Israel doesn't necessarily want the Iran deal to come back into play. It does seem like Biden does, though. That's the catch. And if he does, how does this play politically? I mean, for example, right now, Iran had been increasing the enrichment of the uranium. Now, this is being done to kind of get across a few things, right? It's a provocation. It's to show that, well, you've done your maximum pressure campaign. That maximum pressure campaign hasn't worked, and not just not worked. We're upping the enrichment to get across how much it hasn't worked and to put pressure on the U.S. to basically come back to the deal. Now, considering the U.S. is the one that left the deal, that should be the one to come back. But the U.S. wants to save face. Biden doesn't necessarily want to get called weak. And so you have this kind of weird interplay between these two where it's like, okay, we're going to have negotiations, but not direct negotiations. It's like, but everybody knows you guys are negotiating indirectly. Isn't that the same thing as negotiating directly? No, it's different. It's different. It's this weird this weird dance of saving face. What about now? I mean, if they're making this argument that, and the New York Times does it all the time, Iranian-backed militias does X or Y. And then you read into the details and it's unclear or whether or not it's Iran. They don't even know themselves. What about this? Like, they're blasting this out. Iran did this, or Iran backed did X. Okay, if that's true and if that's the media, what leverage does Biden have in trying to pull the U.S. back to a deal? I'm just very curious on that because I just don't necessarily, I don't know where the U.S. goes if not for the deal. And yet it seems that Biden just can't go back to the deal. It's very weird politics.
Sure. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there when you say, when they say Iran backed. Iran gave money to Nelson Mandela and the people of South Africa in the fight against apartheid. So, could you say that the ANC in South Africa is Iran backed? Iran gave money to the Irish Republican Army. The Irish people, and then during the 1980s, during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. There's even a street in Iran named after Bobby Sands. If the next time there's an IRA incident in Northern Ireland, are we going to say an Iran-backed group does this? I mean, just because Iran has given support to some group at some point does not mean that everything that group does is on direct orders from, the president of Iran or the supreme leader.
Exactly.
I mean, there are many groups around the world that the U.S. government has given guns and weapons to over the years, and no one sits there and pretends that these groups, directly everything they do, is on the orders of the president of the United States. I mean, the world is much more complicated than that. And, we live in a world, it's interesting, there's a Pentagon strategist named William S. Lind, and he has developed this concept of fourth-generation warfare and talked about how, in our current age, it's largely non-state actors that do the fighting. Direct fighting between major countries is not really possible in the age of nuclear weapons because it would lead to, the destruction of the human race. So nowadays, it seems like these non-state actors, independent militias, terrorist groups, insurgents, these kind of groups tend to be the ones that do most of the fighting. And those groups, while they might get supported by somebody, they're not necessarily controlled by somebody. And sometimes they'll be supported by one group and, and change their mind and go and make a deal with another group. Largely the way they turned things around in Iraq at one point, that during the surge, was largely because a lot of these groups that were fighting the United States, the U.S. government just went to them.
We bought them off, right?
Cases of cash.
Yeah, we bought off warlords. right. We just bought them off.
Actors.
I was having this conversation with my wife yesterday about diminishing returns. Like, you get to a certain point where the weapons that you're coming up with are so extreme, and the capacities that you have as a country to distribute like force and to kill, where if you ever unleash it, you end it all. And winning a war is not you dying, if that makes sense. And so it's like you can never unleash the full arsenal because you can never actually win a war under those scenarios. And so what you have are proxies. Like you say, those proxies are out there doing this or that. From the standpoint of the way these guys operate, though, and the way the proxies group, if we're making that argument, basically that because they're getting paid money, that they're backed. Oh, I know what I was going. The interplay between media in this, because you're right. Oftentimes when you read stories, they would say Iran backed or Russia backed or X backed. And often it's groups or countries that we don't particularly like. And it's often very weirdly that the media lines up on the side of the countries we don't particularly like when they're doing stuff like that. You've been in media for a while, and I always think, how does this interplay take place? Is it direct? Is it just that the media goes to government agents and government agents tell them X and they just kind of repeat it as stenographers? Do they just get the zeitgeist of it all and they just kind of attune like fish in a pool? How do they end up like this? Because it's almost a one-to-one. If government doesn't particularly like somebody, if we're enemies, the media is also not going to like them.
Indeed. I mean, lately, if you watch the Joe Biden press conferences, it seems like the press is constantly demanding that Joe Biden be more hawkish. And it doesn't match public opinion. The overwhelming majority of Americans are tired of these wars. They want the troops to be brought home. They don't see what we're benefiting from these wars as a country. But if you watched, especially, you know, after that Putin-Biden summit, or you watch any of these press conferences where we've seen, it seems like the press's main job is to just be on top of Biden. Why aren't you more hostile to this country? Why aren't you more hostile to that country? Why didn't you confront them? I mean, it's like the press has become the war lobby.
And why? Engage there for a moment. But why are they like that? I mean, is it just, you know, they've gotten so accustomed to this kind of American point of view? Because I think on some level it's that. I think it's like where they have there's a point of view in this country of, it's very bizarre, but it's as if we have a right to dictate what people should do in other countries. That's a right, almost. When they killed Soleimani, and you asked the American public, more than half said clean kill, even though they didn't even know who the guy was. Like, how do you do that? How do you justify in your mind, it is our right to do X or Y to other people around the globe? And yet, it's here. It's there. And media has it. Is it that? Like, what is it that allows them to take that point of view like that? I just found it to be an astonishing point of view.
Well, you know, I got to tell you, there was a big moment of revelation for me when I worked. I was, you know, I first worked as a reporter for a Middle Eastern TV network, and I worked in the UN press corps, right? And I was in the UN press. I was stationed at the UN. I was a resident correspondent at the United Nations. And I'm sitting, you know, next to people from ABC and NBC and all the mainstream networks. And, you know, it's quite competitive to be the UN correspondent for mainstream TV networks like, you know, like Fox or BBC or, you know, I mean, it's quite competitive. And so, you know, these are people that went to Harvard. These are people that went to Yale. These are people that are, you know, high-achieving people, you know, top of their class in journalism. And I remember sitting with these people that are the high-achieving cream of the crop, you know, and I'm just with this little Middle Eastern TV network, and I'm sitting there, and, you know, I would talk to these people, and when it came to issues like Syria, when it came to issues like Ukraine, these people had no clue that there were two sides or two perspectives on these conflicts. I would sit there and think these are supposed to be the smartest people in the world. These are supposed to be the most high-achieving, worldly people, and I would listen to them talk, and it never occurred to them that there might be arguments in favor of the Syrian government. Never occurred to them that, like, not everyone in Ukraine was a big fan of Euromaidan.
Yeah.
And I would sit there and I was just like, I was in shock. I'm like, how is this possible? These are supposed to be the most well-educated, advanced, high-achieving people.
So they're not faking. They really don't know, like, because my thing is, like, I often tell Shane, it's like, I don't mind having somebody give a perspective, meaning somebody can give a different take that is grounded in reality, that is being an honest actor and giving that take. And it can be different from yours, despite the fact that you're giving an honest take. They don't know that.
And that's what shocked me. And what I realized is they had gotten into their position, you know, I mean, they had gotten up through the American educational system by learning to, you know, not to think critically, but by learning to repeat the party line. And that seems to be what you do. It used to be, you know, during the Cold War, academia kind of took on the perspective of trying to get people to see the other side of the story. But now it seems like largely what's taught if you go and study international studies, you study political science, the way you're taught to think about things is it's like average people are ignorant. But you go to college, you go to academia to learn how to repeat and know in depth the ruling party line of the United States. Average Americans may not know a whole lot about Ukraine or about Syria, but they do know that they're tired of these wars and they want their relatives in the military to come home, and we're not benefiting as a country. But you go to college, you go to Harvard, and you go to Yale, so you can be an expert, think you're an expert on Syria by knowing one side of the story and tell everybody all about, every allegation made against the Assad government and why it is our duty to intervene and under this charter of the UN. And it's like our education system has very much just turned into State Department indoctrination. Where, I was sitting there, and these people have no clue that there might be two sides to the story. There might be another perspective, right? It's just pretty basic, I've seen the movie Gone with the Wind, but I know that's one side of the story. But, the folks who were enslaved and the folks that were abolitionists and the folks that were fighting against the plantation owners had a very, very different perspective, right? There were two sides to the story. You watch Gone with the Wind, you're getting the Gone with the Wind slave owner perspective. But if you, read history, a lot of other people saw it very differently. But I don't hear that from those folks.
That's so dangerous.
Yeah,
that's so dangerous. Because that means you can't see the other side. Robert McNamara, I can't think of the name, Fog of War, that's what it was. And McNamara makes that point. The Vietnam War, he's having a conversation with, I think it was Ho Chi Minh. And in this kind of back and forth, he's making a point of like, look, only thing we wanted to do was X. And his opposition, Ho Chi Minh, made the point of saying, well, no, you wanted to do this. Meaning they had a fundamental misunderstanding in what each side wanted to accomplish. And he was realizing that all of these people died from a fundamental misunderstanding in what, each side wanted to accomplish. I'm worried about that. That freaks me out. Because I was there. I was at the summit. And I saw the reporters and the way that they were acting. They were like howler monkeys. Like Joe Biden had to come out and basically attack Putin for like X number of minutes before he could finally go into, okay, now this is what we're trying to do in regards to go forward, et cetera, et cetera. It was unacceptable to them. Unacceptable. And so it's like this notion that there's another side or another point of view just doesn't seem to apply. And I was just very curious. Wow, it's unfortunate that that's not an act. That's just, they really believe that. That's unfortunate. Kayla, let's do this. Let's take a break, and I want to bring you back because I want to talk about New York. And I want to get into some of the things that are taking place with Cuomo, especially the trouble that Cuomo is in, and whether or not Cuomo is going to be able to withstand all of the allegations that are against him at this point, or a little bit more than the allegations at this point. But the voice you guys were listening to is Caleb Maupin. He's speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of a changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm typically joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan. He'll be back tomorrow. We're coming out of our station in Washington, D.C. I want to jump to Cuomo in New York. We've been covering the story today, talking about basically the 11 women that are Cuomo is being accused of sexual assaulting or harassing. Letitia James came out yesterday with somewhat of a damning report asserting these allegations against Cuomo, basically saying that these allegations have weight and these are legit. Cuomo came out with a video of him hugging various people, trying to use that as somewhat of a defense. But that is going to be short order, seeing that calls from all corners, including the president, Secretary, Speaker Pelosi, have been calling on him to resign. Cuomo, defiant, has chosen not to resign. To have a conversation with this, we're joined with Caleb Maupin. Caleb Maupin is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of a changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. Again, Caleb, thank you for continuing to join us.
Sure.
So the Cuomo thing is pretty wild to me. This report is brutal. This report is brutal. And her presentation of the findings of the report are just as damning. I mean, her voice, the cadence, all of it. And, you know, it's an independent investigation. He looks bad. Now, the catch becomes what happens now. Some of the elements of it that I want to talk about have to do with office culture. Like, let's say for the moment that some of the people that Cuomo was working with, he seemed to have close ties to. Some of these were women. And if he's known these people for years, and in knowing these people for years, he has certain, I don't know, I guess overly flirtatious, maybe a bit, you know, a bit too, let's say, intimate in regards to the way they engage with one another. And you bring people into that office culture, and those people might feel some kind of way about that. And then you add to Cuomo apparently saying things or touching people in various ways. This report is pretty bad for Cuomo. And I have to be honest, with everybody screaming for him to basically resign, and for, in some cases, they're talking about potential criminal charges, I don't know how he withstands this. What are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on Cuomo and all of this in general in regards to Cuomo, the machine that he created in New York, and what seems to be the toppling of that machine in New York?
Well, first of all, I mean, obviously this behavior he's accused of is reprehensible.
Yes.
So there's, you know, obviously no defense of what he did or is alleged to have done. But I put this in the context basically of a fight going on in the Democratic Party. Because, I mean, I'm sorry, but if you look at, you know, Joe Biden is now calling for Cuomo to step down.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Joe Biden is one to talk. I mean, the allegations against him, the videos of him, you know, yeah, I mean, there's plenty out there. But the fact that this is becoming a big issue in the media, and the fact that these allegations are being taken seriously, I think is related to a fight going on in the Democratic Party. And that basically there are two centers of power right now in the Democratic Party that are contending with each other. One is the urban machines, which is that's the Democratic Party for centuries. I mean, that's been who runs the Democratic Party. The urban machines versus Silicon Valley. And, you know, the Silicon Valley elite, you know, that are very much behind the wokeness, that very much are, you know, are based with, you know, their power is based on social media. You know, they're very much more environmentally concerned, and climate change is their issue. You know, they are trying to clear out some of the old, you know, nepotistic bureaucratic machines that have had kind of a lot of power in the Democratic Party for a long time. And it's not just here in New York. This is happening in California as well. And that, you know, the Democratic Party has always been the party of urban machines, and urban machines are notoriously corrupt. And, you know, there's a lot of people handing out the goods and assigning jobs to friends, and, you know the whole deal. Anyone who's lived in an urban area in the United States can describe this to you. But at the same time, you know, the Silicon Valley folks, they have kind of a social engineering perspective. They very much want to drive living standards down. They very much have kind of a globalist perspective and are trying to build one world economy, and they are not really concerned about, you know, expanding the domestic economy of the United States. And that this is a power struggle within the Democratic Party. Cuomo is very much a product of the urban machines of New York City. You'll notice, I remember when during the protests, you know, people were raising the fact that Christopher Columbus was a mass murderer of indigenous people, and people were protesting against Christopher Columbus. And Governor Cuomo came out and said, "Oh, we have to leave the statue of Christopher Columbus up. You know, it would be offensive to Italians to remove it." What is that about?
It would be offensive to Italians to remove the Christopher Columbus statue. I mean, that's interesting.
On the street, come on. I mean, this is the corrupt urban machines. This is nepotistic relationships. That's New York City politics.
I know, but does it have anything to do with the 11 women that he apparently harassed or assaulted?
Well, like I said, I mean, I'm not denying that he did it. It looks to me like he could very well be guilty of what he's accused of. But the fact that these allegations are taken seriously, look, many people have pointed out that the Me Too movement started when Donald Trump, became president.
Right.
Donald Trump's notorious behavior, And then it stopped when Joe Biden became a nominee. And it looks like now it's started up again, now that the Democrats are waging this fight within their own camp between the woke, folks at the top of the party that are tied to Silicon Valley and the corrupt machines that are notoriously bad. But, again, the issue here, no one's trying to make light of what he
did. No. And you believe that their objective is to drive down living standards. Okay. What group would be, I'm trying to frame it. That's all. I'm trying to put it in context. What group would be trying to drive down living standards?
Well,
what faction of the party wants to drive down living standards?
Would be the elite. That would be the Silicon Valley folks, right? I mean, if you read what they've published, you read what Bill Gates has said, you look at the Great Reset, I mean, you look at some of the documents that have been published. I mean, they largely feel, on the one hand, that basically we need to transition to kind of a one-world, open international system, as Anne-Marie Slaughter, who was part of the Hillary Clinton State Department, put it, an open international system, global free trade. On the one hand, and on the other hand, they feel that, that basically in the name of stopping climate change, we need to drastically reduce consumption. And they're pushing this notion of degrowth, driving down living standards. So that is their perspective. Whereas the perspective of the urban political machines is we hand out the goods and keep our folks happy. It's kind of an opposite perspective.
Those are the only two perspectives. Those are the only two camps. That's depressing.
Well, obviously, politics is far more complex.
Yeah, of course. I'm just somewhat teasing. No, Caleb, thank you, man. I appreciate this. It's fascinating. Let me ask you this: what do you think happens from here on out? And what's life in New York after Cuomo?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
he's been there for so long. He's been a fixture.
I mean, he's still standing his guns, and I'll tell you that New York City Tammany Hall political machine is very powerful. And I mean, he's survived worse. He's survived worse. I mean, if he's out, he's out.
Wait, you think he survived worse? What worse did Cuomo survive? This seems pretty brutal.
The scandal with the elderly, the old folks' homes, that was pretty awful.
Well, that's not over with yet. I mean, that investigation is still ongoing.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, this guy is a very, very powerful person. He knows the right people. He has a big network of supporters. It's going to be hard to get him out. I mean, I'll tell you that much. Right, some low-level politician would be done at this point.
Yeah.
This is Cuomo.
One last question on New York, and that gets to, we were talking to someone, I believe it was Ted Rawl. He was telling us about how, like, the streets, the businesses, how those things have basically been in such decline since COVID, and that trying to open up the city and trying to get all of those things back online hasn't necessarily been all that great. Not to mention crime and violent crime has been an issue associated with it. What has your take been on that? I mean, have you seen signs of reinvigoration, or New York has just, like, what is the issue? What is the crux of the issue?
Well, again, it's the dual nature of the city, right? And it plays into this fight within the Democratic Party, because New York City, on the one hand, is a city. It's a very big city. It's got a lot of businesses, it's got a lot of tourism, et cetera. But New York City is also the capital of the global economy, right? And it's the home of Wall Street, and it's a big, global financial hub for the global economy. And that contradiction has played out in New York City politics. And, when Giuliani came in and, quote unquote, cleaned up New York, and he was the NYPD mayor who, was associated with all kinds of, broken window policing, police brutality, making New York City much more, wholesome to tourists and making tourists feel much happier to come here. That was largely him defending, like, the local businesses, basically, and saying, we want local businesses to thrive. We want to protect, the kind of the local financial interests. Whereas, the Democratic Party and a lot of the other forces in the city have long kind of seen their role as kind of, running the city on behalf of its global role. And that has been a confrontation. And now you put this in the context of the defund the police situation. You put that in the context of the COVID lockdowns and all of that. And you have a situation where the local businesses and the local economy, which tend to be conservative, which tend to be in with the NYPD, that tend to be in with, the machine and the more, they're Democrats because New York City is a Democratic city, but there are folks that a lot of them voted for Trump. So you have that layer. And then you have the forces that are in with Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley has been buying up property in this city. That's one thing that many people are not aware of. But, as folks have been going out of business, Google has been buying property here. We've been seeing other tech companies. This is very much becoming a tech city. As the domestic economy has suffered, as the local economy has just been demolished, boarded up stores everywhere. It's been just devastated by COVID. While that's happening, we're seeing the tech giants in Silicon Valley is starting to set up shop here, and that more globally oriented faction and the perspective that New York City is just kind of a hub in the global economy. And that maybe tourism isn't that important because who really cares? And that perspective is gaining the upper hand. And in some ways, that's good because the NYPD has been out of control. I mean, the police brutality that we saw, especially under Giuliani, the escalation, that was done, in the name of trying to make the city, good for business. And that had some really, really awful effects. I mean, a lot of people's lives were destroyed. It was, the criminalization of homeless people, et cetera. So it's complicated, right? I mean, it's a complicated situation. But I would argue that COVID has kind of given the more globally oriented wing of New York City politics the upper hand.
Very interesting. Caleb, thank you for this. I think there's parts of that I want to complain or argue with, but I don't necessarily know if we have time to entirely dig into it. From the standpoint of a political party, though, you're not saying that the political apparatus, it wants to do that. You're saying that elements that are, let's say, in like the Silicon Valley elements, the Gates of the world, they want to do it. But there's a difference between what a political device wants versus what this kind of private capitalist device wants.
Yes, absolutely, and there are different forces with different agendas pulling on the New York City Democratic Party, and there are different forces within the New York City Democratic Party.
Fair enough. The Voice that you guys are listening to is Caleb Maupin. He's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of a changing U.S. political discourse and a geopolitical stage. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm typically joined with my co-host, Shane Stranahan. He's not feeling well, but he should be back tomorrow. This is the last 7 minutes of Fault Lines, but we're going to take your calls. We have Tarif, who's on the line. Tarif from New Orleans. What's happening, Tarif? What's going on?
Comments. First comment is dealing with China. They ran the U.S. ran a war game scenario last year, and a majority of the war game scenarios in the South China Sea that U.S. lost. The only one won when he put in the computer simulation, false airports, for the Air Force, and using new technology that's not in existence. That's the only time they won.
Magic.
Second comment is dealing with, I know, right? The second comment is dealing with a retired Taiwanese general that says that all 3 military branches in Taiwan should overtake the government and reunite with China because China is not the same like they used to be in the 50s and 60s and 70s. They're more advanced, and the CCP is communist, but they leaning towards capitalism. So he created a big store. And
I can imagine.
Like that.
I can imagine.
My last comment is dealing with our job. What's his name? Jamal Baraka.
Oh, yeah, Jamu Baraka, right.
He made a comment yesterday, or 10 hours ago, about the election in Ohio dealing with Nina Turner.
What did he say about that? I'm curious. What was his take?
Right, he tweeted out, this is what he tweeted out. The black misleadership class and the neoliberal fascist Democratic Party got what it paid for in Ohio, providing once again that the U.S. is the best democracy money can buy. Oh, and Black Lives Matter, as long as they're serving the white capitalist power. That's what he said.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of money was dropped in at the last minute.
Yep.
Against Turner. Against Nina Turner. A ton of money. And so I understand where he's coming from with that. I mean, yeah, they got what they paid for, basically, if you want to put it that way. I mean, Clyburn, you had the Congressional Black Caucus. And if you think about what Turner pushes for, I mean, housing, and somebody made this point about Cori Bush. Cori Bush is basically a Nina Turner. Cori Bush is probably one of those people that has been closest to the public. She has gone through all sorts of economic difficulties throughout the course of her life that's somewhat governed the way she thinks about politics and everything else. And if she wasn't part of our political space, it's possible that Biden would have never looked for a new fig leaf or new rule that they could put a new moratorium on. Like, it matters. Like, it has real world consequences. You know, what do you say? Elections have consequences. Well, we've just kept a Cori Bush out of office. So, Tarif, yes, I know where you're coming from on that one. And I feel him. She would have been a phenomenal congresswoman. And the catch becomes, what happens next for her? And I don't quite know. But Tarif, thank you, man. And by the way, Tarif, the war games thing. I've seen these war games exercises run before. I mean, the problem is, it's kind of what I was talking to, I believe I was talking to Caleb about. At a certain point, there's diminishing returns. It's like the speed of light. It's like, yes, if you are going in, non-relativistic speeds, you can always add a booster, or you can always, add more. But the closer you get to the speed of light, you get this thing where it's a limit. It's a finite amount. You get bigger, you get slower, or not slower, but you have to put more energy involved in order to keep going. And even then you get diminishing returns. It's kind of like with the war. If we are trying to have a war and I'm trying to win it, okay, what does winning it means? It means I'm alive, my enemy is dead. What happens when the weapons get so dramatic that everybody dies? Is an outcome. Like, what happens? Like, it's like you getting into situations like that with these weapons becoming so insane. So I can imagine if there's a war game exercise and the goal of it is to win it, then yeah, you're probably going to have a hard time doing that. So, Tarif, thank you for joining me, man. I appreciate it. All right, so yeah, I'm glad he mentioned that. There was another one with, I believe, Denmark, if I'm not mistaken. It was a weird one, but basically they were doing this kind of naval warfare. And they found that an old-style submarine was able to take down all of these modern ships. And the reason had to do with the technology that it was using was old. So the newer ships didn't necessarily expect technology out there that was that in the rears. Military and technology and that stuff is always very strange in the outcomes. And it's not always easy to predict what is going to take place in regards to a conflict, especially when that conflict first pops off. And dealing with someone that's a peer nation is not something that I think we want to engage in. I mean, if you think about what Caleb said, that basically, most of the war or most of the conflict that takes place now are proxies. It's secondary groups. It's I'm paying this group in order to attack this other group. With the notion that it doesn't necessarily fall back on you, even though you might necessarily get blamed for it. It's very weird logic. It's like, I know that this guy is paying that guy to mess with me. By the same token, because he's not doing that directly, it's not quite the same thing. It's very strange. It's very weird. And so, yeah, Tarif, thanks for bringing it up. And Tarif has brought up some other good stories. The one with China developing the thorium reactor. And I think it was mentioned before that the thorium reactor had already been in existence. But at this point, this is being built and is being sold. So this is going to be a product basically for business. So again, what do you say? It's a capitalist country, mostly. I don't think they would call themselves that, but I understand what you mean by it. Well, I'm hearing the music. It's my gentle reminder that we're going to close out today. This is Fault Lines. I want to give a thanks out to Shane. He'll be back tomorrow. I want to give a shout out to my producers, Cordell Woodland and Austin Pelly. And I want to give a shout out to our engineer, Andre. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan, signing off. You guys have a good day.